The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Medea Benjamin's new book, Kingdom of the Unjust, Behind the U.S.-Saudi Connection. And this is from the introduction. Through the women-led peace organization Code Pink, which I co-founded with Jody Evans after the 9/11 attacks, I have spent much of the last decade standing up against U.S. military intervention in the Middle East and supporting local democracy activists. I traveled many times to the region, listening to human rights activists, marching with them in the streets, dodging tear gas and bullets, and getting beaten up and deported by government thugs. I have seen firsthand the deadly effects of U.S. foreign policies. The 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq destroyed the lives of millions, including many of my dear friends, and unleashed the sectarian hatred that later gave birth to the Islamic State. I recall a conversation with my Iraqi colleague Yanar Mohammed, daughter of a Shiite father and a Sunni mother, and founder of the Organization of Women's Freedom in Iraq. When I asked her what was the most notable legacy of the U.S. invasion of her country, she gave the chilling response: we, Sunnis and Shia, learned to hate each other. In another part of the Middle East, U.S. military support for Israel has wreaked havoc on the lives of Palestinians and aroused the ire of people throughout the region. Continuous U.S. military interventions, from drone warfare in Yemen to overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi in Libya to funneling an endless stream of weapons into the region, have unleashed new levels of violence. But the United States is not the only nation whose massive footprint has been trampling on the lives of people in the Middle East. The other nation is Saudi Arabia, an oppressive monarchy that denies human rights to its own people and exports extremism around the world. It also happens to be the closest U.S. ally in the Arab world. During the 1980s and 1990s, I met intolerant and violent young men in Pakistan and Afghanistan who were trained to hate Westerners in Saudi schools. In 2001, I saw my own nation convulsed by an attack on September 11th that was perpetrated mostly by Saudis. Not hard to connect the dots behind the spread of the Saudi intolerant ideology of Wahhabism, the creation of al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, and the attacks in New York, Paris, Brussels, and San Bernardino. You can also connect the dots between Saudi Arabia and the failure of some of the historic uprisings associated with the Arab Spring, since the Saudi monarchy did not want calls for democracy to threaten its own grip on power. I was in Bahrain after Saudi tanks crushed the inspiring grassroots encampment in Pearl Square, where tens of thousands had gathered day after day to demand democracy. I will never forget the excitement of being in Tahrir Square during the Egyptian Revolution, and watching aghast as a military coup backed by the Saudis put some 40,000 activists behind bars. In Yemen, the Saudis took a direct military role in that nation's internal conflict with a ruthless bombing campaign. When I travel overseas, people often ask me why Saudi Arabia, a country that is so repressive internally and overseas, is such a close ally to the United States. Iranian friends want to know why the U.S. government is so outspoken about human rights violations in Iran, but silent about the worst abuses in the Saudi kingdom. Yemenis want to ask why my government supplies weapons to the very nation, Saudi Arabia, that bombed their schools and hospitals. Saudi women ask why the United States, which professes great democratic values, props up a regime that treats women as second-class citizens. The easy answer is oil, weapon sales, and other business interests. Oil has formed the basis for U.S.-Saudi ties. The kingdom has become the largest purchaser of American weapons in the world, and hundreds of billions of Saudi petrodollars help shore up the U.S. economy. But there's another reason, perhaps more critical than any of the others. The American people have not demanded an end to this dysfunctional, toxic relationship. Why? In part because the American people know so little about it. Even Americans who consider them parts of a peace movement know virtually nothing about the kingdom. The Saudi press is muzzled, foreign journalists are strictly monitored, and only tourists visiting for religious purposes are allowed into the country. Add to that a Saudi lobby that lines the pockets of U.S. think tanks, such as the Middle East Institute, Ivy League universities, such as Harvard and Yale, and influential institutions from the Clinton Foundation to the Carter Center. This checkbook diplomacy helps put a happy face on the abusive monarchy and silences its critics. We have a lot to uncover. This book is meant to be a primer, giving readers a basic understanding of how the kingdom holds on to power internally and tries to influence the outside world. It looks at the founding of the Saudi state, the treatment of dissidents, religious minorities, women, and migrant workers, the spread of Wahhabism, the kingdom's relationship with the West, and its role in the region, and what the future might hold. As we delve into the inner workings of this dystopian regime, don't mistake criticism of Saudi Arabia for Islamophobia. This book is not a critique of Islam, but a critique of three intertwining factors that have shaped the Saudi nation: the extremist interpretation of Sunni Islam, known as Wahhabism, the appropriation of the Saudi state by one family, and Western support for this dynasty. Criticizing Saudi Arabia should not be equated with support for Saudi's nemesis, Iran. The Iranian government is guilty of some of the same abuses as the Saudis. Book Kingdom of the Unjust.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. A lot in the news today. Alan Grayson, it's been a long time since we've heard about Alan Grayson, right? Alan Grayson, the former congressman from Florida, congressman with guts, right? He just sent out, he's raising money, and I'm not sure if he's going to be running for Senate or where he's going with this, but his fundraising email, which is fascinating. It's titled "Poverty is Fatal." And Grayson is so right on this. I mean, these are the kind of topics that he was always kind of focused on. And he says, last year I publicized a study by the Brookings Institution that found that rich Americans are living 14 years longer than poor Americans. And last month we found out why. A medical study in South Africa found that people with significant financial stress, in quotes, were 13 times more likely to have a heart attack. Not 13% more likely, not even 130% more likely. No, 13 times more likely. And he compares, and the study, of course, on that stress and the heart attacks was done in South Africa. And he says, well, good news for South Africans, though. South Africa has national health insurance. The United States, which is 10 times as wealthy, does not. Right. So meanwhile, over at the New York Times, Peter Goodman writes this piece called "The Robots Are Coming and Sweden is Fine." So this kind of raises the question. Grayson's talking about how poverty is deadly. Poverty is particularly deadly in the United States because we don't have a national health insurance program. We don't have a really good and comprehensive and evenly applied social safety net program. It's getting harder and harder to even get Social Security disability. Republicans have been cutting the budget of Social Security, the administrative staff, for years, I mean, repeatedly. So it's getting harder and harder just, to deal with the bureaucracy, which, of course, is the Republican way, right? Break government, and then stand around and go, oh, it's broken. Time to replace it with Citibank. So anyhow, the United States is arguably one of the most, well, not arguably, the United States is the worst developed country in the world in which to be poor. The developed countries. Yeah, I get it. There's terrible poverty in much of the rest of the world, but I'm talking about the developed world here. And in Scandinavia, They're doing just fine with the loss of jobs to automation. Right? I mean, here's an eye-popping statistic, right? 80% of Swedes express positive views about robots and artificial intelligence. Compare that. This is from Pew Research. That was the European Commission got that study. Pew Research found that 72% of Americans are worried about a future with robots and computers. Why? Well, because in Sweden, you don't have to worry if you lose your job. And it's not that you can sit around and be, quote, lazy. I mean, yes, every culture, every society is going to have that small 2, 3, 4% of people. It's why we consider 4% unemployment to be maximum, unemployment, or maximum employment rather. Obviously, it's not entirely that, because a chunk of that 4% is people being recycled through the system who are only temporarily unemployed. But the point is that in every country, you're going to have a few freeloaders, but they tend to be very small, few and far between. Just like with voter fraud, this is another canard that the Republicans have pushed for years to promote their own social and financial agenda. And their agenda, of course, being more money for rich people in the United States. So, as Peter Goodman reports for the New York Times, he says, in much of the world, people whose livelihoods depend on paychecks are increasingly anxious about automation. He talks about, the robots are coming to get us. He says, but such talk has little currency in Sweden or its Scandinavian neighbors, where unions are powerful, government support is abundant, and trust between employers and employees runs deep. Here, robots are just another way to make companies more efficient. As employers prosper, workers have consistently gained a proportionate slice of the spoils. A stark contrast to the United States and Britain, where wages have stagnated while even corporate profits have soared. And, he talks about how, losing your job can wipe you out in the United States. Losing your job in Sweden doesn't wipe you out. He says, yet in Sweden and the rest of Scandinavia, governments provide health care along with free education. They pay generous unemployment benefits while employers finance extensive job training programs. Unions generally embrace automation as a competitive advantage that makes jobs more secure. Now, the big difference between the United States and Sweden is that we spend about 20% of our economy, essentially, to programs that help jobless and vulnerable people. Sweden spends 27%. Where does the rest of that money go here in the United States? Mostly it goes into defense and tax cuts for billionaires. And then he notes, a pair of Oxford University researchers concluded that nearly half of all American jobs could be replaced by robots or other forms of automation over the next 20 years. Sweden doesn't care. They're embracing it. They're looking forward to it. They're having fun with it. What are we doing in the United States and England, though? Well, this is on the front page of the Financial Times. Worldwide mergers and acquisitions activity, this by Arash Massoudi, James Fontanella-Kahn, and Don Wineland. Worldwide mergers and acquisitions activity has exceeded $3 trillion for the fourth consecutive year. Now, what does that mean? What that means is big companies are getting much, much bigger. Medium-sized companies are being eaten alive. Small companies no longer even have a chance. That's what it means. Again, quoting from the Financial Times, the final month of 2017 was capped by 3 blockbuster transactions, sparked by companies taking action against the threat of disruption from the likes of Amazon, Facebook, and Netflix, which are all moving into new sectors, they say. And they give examples. Because, Amazon is going into the pharmaceutical business. The U.S.'s biggest drugstore chain, CVS Health, agreed to acquire health care insurer Aetna for about $69 billion. Meanwhile, Amazon's effect on retail worldwide prompted Australia's billionaire Lowe family to sell its global shopping center business, Westland, to France's Unibail Rodamco for $24 billion. And they the 21st Century Fox and Disney and all this stuff. And basically what they're saying is that the way that here's what it boils down to. The way that wealth is generated in Sweden, a high-tax, strong social safety net country, what's called social welfare capitalism, or democratic socialism. On the pages of the Financial Times, they refer to it as social welfare capitalism, but I would call it democratic socialism, as you have all over all over Northern Europe. what they do is they share the wealth with everyone in the country. What we do here in the United States is pretty much everything we can, including the recent tax scam from the Republican Party. We do everything we can to make sure that the rich get richer and richer and richer and richer, and that working people are more and more tightly squeezed. Why? Well, the Republicans have this weird theory that if people are terrified, if people are unemployed, if people are in a crisis, that they'll work harder. Now, you know, I can give you that short term, you poke somebody with a cattle prod, you're going to get a response. But over a period of time, you're going to exhaust them. You're going to wipe them out. And that's what's happening in the United States. Our workforce is being devastated. Our economy is being ravaged by these giant corporations. And then you go to, like, you know, the Cato Foundation. This is in Forbes magazine. It's from a couple of years ago by David Brenori. Where is the outrage over corporate welfare? And he says, you know, the Fortune 500 corporations alone accounted for 16,000 subsidy awards. That's $63 billion in direct corporate welfare, money taken from your tax dollars and mine through the state and federal governments and handed over to just the Fortune 500, $63 billion. It's amazing.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Food stamps may cost you $16. The corporate welfare could be over $2,400 a year. And welcome back. Paul in Castle Rock, Colorado. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV today.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking my call, Tom. I'm a long-time listener and first-time caller. I was looking at this net neutrality thing, and it seems to me that everybody's focused on what social media or what content that they're going to be locked out on and things like that. But I think the big picture says that they're going to control all of the content. So what we're going to have is we're just going to exponentially expand the far-right point of view and eliminate everything else.
It may be. I mean, it depends on whether Twitter, Facebook, Google, you know, these companies that control so much of our experience on the internet. In fact, the internet has, you know, more than half of people who use the internet now don't actually use the internet. They live within these little communities, these tightly defined boundaries, internet boundaries within Facebook, where it's really hard to get out of Facebook. You can't email somebody from Facebook, for example, or into Facebook. Same thing with Twitter. Twitter's not quite as restrictive, but you know, depending on the interface you're using. But the day will come. And so, you know, the imperative right now is to lock in people's, you know, and participation, and then the ISPs are going to do the same thing. So I think that, you know, we're already halfway there, Paul.
Yeah, that kind of scares me with the voters' registration laws that have been changing and the misinformation, and then how revealing this last election was with Trump, and then all the misinformation and things like that. I think just gave the Republicans another weapon that's going to be. It's going to take a mass movement to overcome that.
Yeah. Well, that's the bad news. The good news is that a mass movement is forming. So, you know.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Here we are.
That.
Here we are. Paul, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Well said. Jared in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I want to talk to you about 2018 and the Get Out to Vote. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious, what is the Democrats' plan in order to get people, you know, to get out to vote, to know, like, where their voting precinct is at, what kind of IDs they need, if they need an ID to vote, right, and all that stuff, you know, get people to the polls by buses or anything like that. Right. Because I vote every year, And I'm just curious because a lot of people don't vote. And
Yeah,
they don't
I agree.
know
And
what
it's,
they're voting.
and it's a major problem. Jared, the Democratic Party, as is the case with the Republican Party, by the way, they both have this pretty well fine-tuned. And you saw it on display in the election in Georgia recently where Doug Jones won. It's a very good get-out-the-vote effort. They recruit volunteers, plus they have paid staff. People make multiple phone calls. They offer, rides to the polls, things like that. Both parties do this. There's a number of independent groups that do it. The problem that we have is not so much that people aren't showing up to vote. It's that the Republicans, particularly in red states, are erecting institutional barriers to voting. Putting crappy voting machines in poor neighborhoods so that the lines are 2, 3, 5, 10 hours long. Making it so that you can't vote unless you have a current ID. So if you're an older person who's concerned about Social Security, you may not even have a valid driver's license anymore. Stuff like that. Jared, I got to run. Welcome back. I mentioned on Twitter on Sunday, I think it was, that Louise and I and our family, our kids, and Louise's brother and his wife and all that, we went to see Star Wars here in Portland, and The Last Jedi, the what is it, 7th, 9th, 8th? I don't, whatever it is. Anyway, I'm not a total Star Wars geek, but I've seen all the movies and I like them a lot. And what I tweeted was, now I know why the media that supports the misogynistic, racist, right-wing wackadoodles hates the Star Wars movie. And I think this is, I hope I'm not being a spoiler here at all. What I will tell you is, well, this is actually in the very, very beginning of the movie. In fact, this is from The Intercept, Kate Aronoff writing. She opens her piece. Again, this is not a spoiler. Before touching down on the, or maybe marginally, I guess we all have different spoiler thresholds, right? Before touching down on the planet of Canto Bright, Rose looks down forebodingly to tell us it's full of the worst people in the galaxy. Cut to champagne glasses clinking and a casino full of galactic one-percenters. Rose says, only one business in the galaxy can get you this rich. Selling weapons to the First Order. And then, from that's kind of how the movie opens, right? It's the good guys who are male and female and a variety of races. It's the good guys against the bad guys who are defense contractors and largely white men. And I love it. I thought it was a fascinating kind of poke into the ethos of these two different cultures, essentially, a small d democratic and small p progressive culture, and a highly oligarchic, pretty radical culture. So there's that. Just wanted to share. I tweeted that I would share my thoughts with you, and I just did. The other is the blank F-word CNN. This over by David Edwards over at rawstory.com. And we talked a little bit when Kathy Griffin did her Medusa head thing. Her version of Perseus, I guess, holding the head of Medusa. Only it was not Medusa, it was actually just a regular plastic Halloween mask of Donald Trump with some ketchup on it or something red on it to indicate blood. And she lost her job over that. She lost the New Year's Eve gig with Anderson Cooper. So he's doing it with Andy Cohen this year. And there's a whole lot of people who are just saying no. Jim tweeted the CNN New Year's Eve promos with Anderson Cooper and Andy are proof positive that firing Kathy Griffin was a huge mistake. Apologize, give her a boatload of money, and we could forget the whole unfortunate incident. Mr. Bad Examples tweets, refused to watch CNN New Year's show without Kathy Griffin, horrible decision. David Marks tweets, shame on CNN for canceling Kathy Griffin. It just goes on like this. I mean, there's just tweet after tweet after tweet. You can read the whole link over at Raw Story. The piece, CNN, viewers boycott CNN New Year's show en masse over Kathy Griffin's firing for anti-Trump satire. Are you going to watch CNN with Andy Cohen and Anderson Cooper, or are you going to boycott it? Or do you, whether you're going to boycott it or not, do you think that, you know, Kathy Griffin should have been dumped? I think that frankly, she was not given space for the hysteria to unwind itself and due process. Although the fact of the matter is that, you know, she simply is an employee of CNN, which is, you know, owned by Time Warner. All that kind of, I mean, you know, she's simply an employee of a big multinational corporation that's looking to protect its profits. And when the right wing went nuts, and in fact, there's the story about how this thing, yeah, no, it's not in this article, but the story is, I mean, you know, originally it was a fairly obscure posting until it made its way to Breitbart, and then it made its way to Fox, and then it made its way to Donald Trump. And when Donald Trump tweeted about how his son Barron was freaked out because Kathy Griffin was holding his bloody head, that was when the whole thing came down, crashing down around her. And that was when CNN said, okay, that's it, and pulled the plug, I believe, as I recall. And so, you know, what should happen there? I don't know. It's a tough one. But anyway. Charles in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Nazadrovia, comrade, is another glorious day in Trumpistan, is it not?
Indeed it is. What's up, Charles?
Hey, apropos of the top of the show, and also you typically sometimes say that Republican presidencies tend to come with a host of social ailments. Can you kind of just give a couple, 3 seconds of what those are?
Not sure what you're talking about here, Charles.
Well, like teen suicide and
that's not Republican presidency.
Shorter.
Yeah, that actually Kate Pickett and Robert Wilkinson, as I recall, or Richard Wilkinson, wrote 2 books. One was called Why Inequality Matters. The other is called The Spirit Level. They have a website. If you can Google the Spirit Level website, and they compiled decades worth of research on the effects of inequality, not poverty, but inequality. And what they found was that the higher the rate of inequality, in other words, the smaller the middle class and the more pronounced the very rich and very poor were in a society, the higher the level of inequality, the higher the level of a whole variety of social ills, teen pregnancy, teen suicide, general suicide, mental illness, spousal abuse, child abuse, drug addiction, venereal diseases, prenatal sex, abortions. I mean, the whole potload of it. Doesn't tie to poverty, it ties to inequality. So that's my point, Charles. You want to add something? You got 10 seconds.
Yeah, well, for that reason, Fox News is killing its constituency because they're sowing this hate.
Yeah, I agree. And hopefully one day they'll wake up, your constituents. Thanks, Charles.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Right back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
We're reading today from Jesse Eisinger's new book, shall we call it the Chicken Poop Club? Why the Justice Department Fails to Prosecute Executives. This is from the introduction. It's from page 15 in the introduction. Boom, bust, and crackdown. America's economic history is unfolded in a series of booms, followed by busts, followed crucially by crackdowns. After the stock market crash of 1929, congressional hearings channeled public outrage and resulted in landmark laws regulating Wall Street and creating the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1934. A few years later, a new SEC helped put the head of the mighty New York Stock Exchange in prison. Though inconsistent, the SEC over the intervening decades emerged as one of the most respected government regulatory bodies. The SEC is the most important corporate regulator, overseeing publicly traded companies in the nation's capital markets, money markets. The agency has civil powers, must team up with the various offices of the Justice Department when a securities laws violation turns into a criminal investigation. After the go-go years of the late 1960s, the SEC worked closely with the Southern District to take on top law firms, top accounting firms, and top executives who had helped perpetrate corporate frauds. After the savings and loan scandals of the 1980s, when hundreds of small banks across the country failed due to reckless real estate loans, the Department of Justice prosecuted over 1,000 people, including top executives of many of the largest failed banks. After the Michael Milken-run junk bomb boom and blow-up of the late 1980s, prosecutors spent years digging up evidence of stock manipulation and insider trading at major investment banks and law firms, prosecuting some of the most powerful Wall Street figures of the era. In the early 2000s, the NASDAQ bubble burst. The NASDAQ bubble revealed a corporate book-cooking pandemic. Top officers from giants such as Enron, WorldCom, Quest Communications, Adelphia, and Tyco International ended up in prison. Recklessness and stupidity fuel booms, but usually so do crimes. By contrast, after the 2008 financial crisis, the government failed. In response to the worst calamity to hit capital markets and the global economy since the Great Depression, the government did not charge any top bankers. The public was furious. Bank bailouts and a lack of consequences for banksters radicalized both ends of the political spectrum and gave rise to two of the most potent social movements of our time, Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. Anger about the lack of Wall Street accountability seeded disenchantment with Obama. The 2016 insurgency of Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who challenged frontrunner Hillary Clinton almost to the doors of the Democratic Convention, demonstrated the anger that remained on the left years after the apex of the crisis, undergirding mistrust about Clinton. She had given friendly, fateful, and highly compensated speeches to investment banks. While a Republican president had presided over the crisis and a Democratic one had saved the financial system, Hillary Clinton, Obama, and the Democrats could not claim to be the protectors of the working class and the scourges of investment bankers. That was due in large measure to the lack of corporate prosecutions. According to the Wall Street Journal, analysis of 156 criminal and civil cases brought by the Justice Department, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission against 10 of the largest banks on Wall Street since 2009, in 81% of the cases, the government neither charged nor even identified individual employees. In the remainder, the government only charged 47 low and mid-level employees. Merely one was a boardroom-level executive whom the SEC charged civilly rather than criminally. In his own incoherent and superficial ways, Donald Trump rode anger about Wall Street throughout his campaign, railing at the bank's power. He closed his campaign by hinting poisonously about a cabal of global bankers rigging the system. He assailed politicians who were owned by Goldman Sachs, Trump's word. His first Ted Cruz in the primary and then Hillary Clinton in the general. The Republican platform called for breaking up the big banks by returning to the Glass-Steagall Act, the Depression-era law that splits commercial bank from investment banking, a reflection of resentment about the government bailout of the financial system as the bankers wriggled free. No sooner had Trump taken office, though, than he rushed to stuff members of that cabal into his White House and cabinet. He and Goldman alumni who advised him moved within days of taking office to unravel Dodd-Frank and loosen restrictions on corporations generally. It's commonplace to observe that no top bankers from the top financial firms went to prison for the widespread malfeasance that led to the 2008 financial crisis. It's such a socially acceptable opinion that no less than an inside-the-beltway figure than the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, said, after he was safely out of office, that more bankers should have gone to prison. The problem is worse than that. Today's Justice Department has lost the will and indeed the ability to go after the highest-level corporate wrongdoers. The problem did not begin in the aftermath of the 2008 crash, and it has not ended. Prosecutors don't simply struggle to put executives for too-big-to-fail banks in prison. They also cannot hold accountable wrongdoing executives from a gamut of large corporations, from pharmaceutical to technology to large industrial operations to retail giants. And, the book goes on from there, laying out exactly who and how and why. It's extraordinary. The Chicken Beep Club
All about the Hartmann.com/podcast. They're commercial free, and you can listen anytime, any place you want.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Erica Garner, Eric Garner's daughter, is brain dead from the heart attack she had a couple of days ago. We retweeted her family's tweet on this. This is, you know, just kind of following on. It was so obvious that the police, you know, killed him. I mean, I would consider that murder. And here his daughter. I mean, this is the thing in the United States. Poverty. Of all the OECD countries in the United States, we're in the bottom 2 or 3 of all the 34 most developed countries in the world in terms of your ability to move out of the social class into which you were born. If you're born poor, odds are you're going to die poor. You're born lower middle class, odds are you'll die lower middle class. Born middle class, odds are you'll die. Born rich, odds are you'll die much richer. That's the United States right now. That's not much of the rest of the world, but that's the United States. The Secretary of State, John Merrill, in Alabama, says that at 1 o'clock this afternoon, which will be, I believe, in either a half hour or an hour and a half. I don't remember if Alabama's Eastern or Central time. They're going to go ahead and certify that election and make Doug Jones the senator. Well, actually, Mitch McConnell has to do his part too, but apparently Roy Moore is contesting this. And in the funniest tweet of the day, and a tip of the hat to Kate Pete over at Democratic Underground for finding this. This is Murphy the Goat, the bonus tweet. Roy Moore claims to have proof that tens of thousands of underage women voted in the Alabama Senate election. He is demanding their names, phone numbers, Tinder accounts, and parents' work schedules. Right. Good one, Murphy. But, you know, it's a joke, but say love you. Anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls here. Mary in Venice, Florida. Hey, Mary, thanks for listening to iHeartRadio. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. As a member of the U.S. government Foreign Service under Department of State, I'm wondering, I keep hearing stuff on this new tax law, and there are a lot of U.S. government employees who are wondering, how is this really going to affect us? There are rumors out there, because when you're in the Foreign Service and you are residing in a foreign country representing the U.S. government, we normally get our housing paid for. Our children go to school, whether it's a private or a public school. It's supposed to be based on what our kids can go through in public school in the U.S.
Right.
Now there are rumors that we are now going to be taxed on all of those quote-unquote benefits that, according to, and I wanted to call you because I know you're up on all of the tax requirements and stuff, but 26 U.S. Code, Section 912, normally states exemption for certain allowances, and it points to the Foreign Service Act, I believe, of 1980.
Mm-hmm. And in the tax bill, I'm not, Mary, your assertion that I'm knowledgeable about this is
very specific.
Is slightly misplaced. And I don't think anybody is an expert on this tax bill right now, except for the lobbyists who wrote it, because a great piece in today's New York Times about how CPAs right now are just combing through this tax. I mean, it's a 1,000-page piece of legislation, and a lot of words in there. And the CPAs are combing through it, looking for ways that they can, new loopholes that they can extract, more money on behalf of their wealthier corporate clients. Its impact on foreign service workers, I don't know the details of, Mary. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I appreciate you even telling me that.
Sure. I'm sorry I don't have the answer, but I do know that there were, substantial changes in the way that people could expense business expenses, essentially, which arguably, if you're in the Foreign Service and you're overseas, living overseas is a business expense. But because that's your work. It's a work expense. And that's going to negatively affect everybody from long-haul truckers to Uber drivers. But whether or how those specific provisions made it into the final legislation, I don't know, and neither does anybody who voted on it. Nobody who voted on this bill read it. Nobody. It was physically impossible. So, not only do the legislators not know what's in it, you and I don't know what's in it. We're just slowly beginning to find out. And like I said, the lobbyists are the only ones who know, and they're not telling. Because, they're going to go back to their company and say, yeah, we slipped an and instead of an or into line 327 on page 722, and it's going to cause our corporation to now qualify for $1 billion tax cut. But nobody else will know that until the corporation actually submits that thing to the IRS. You know what I'm talking about? It's.
Oh, yeah,
so.
It's their bread and butter,
Yep.
and regardless of how it affects everybody else further down.
There you go. Yep, absolutely. So,
Thank you so much, Tom. I know I have listened to you all across the world at least 10 years.
Wow.
And
thank you, Mary.
I thank you for everything you do.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the call. Will in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Will, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. How you doing? By the way, just for real quick, I'm actually used to be known as Will from Blakesley.
Oh, great.
I don't know if you remember me.
Oh, yeah.
Used to call it.
Sure.
Yeah, I moved to Oregon. We moved to Oregon 2 years ago. So.
Okay.
Anyway, the reason I'm calling, I've been listening to you every day since. Now that you live in Oregon, you're probably familiar with this, I would assume. But there's going to be a bill measure on January 23rd. It's called Measure 101.
Right.
Do you know what this is?
I read an article about it in the Oregonian a couple of weeks ago, but I don't recall the details.
Yeah. Okay. Real quick, what it is? It's good. Just from a progressive's point of view, vote yes, absolutely vote yes. Basically, what it is, the Democrats in the state legislature added 2 new taxes to basically fill in the gaps from the Trump admin's robbing money from Medicaid.
Yeah, not to mention the kicker, with the annual problem of the kicker. Therefore, the state has no rainy day fund.
For the annual, you removed $400 billion. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, that's what it's supposed to replace. Basically, it taxes the insurance companies in Oregon, what as you call and I do, the banksters. And it also puts a tax on for-profit hospitals in Oregon, and then it replaces it. Now, that was passed already in the legislature last year, just at the end of the last year. And then, of course, a bunch of groups went and they sued to have. He got the Koch. It is the Koch brothers. I researched this. It's the Cato Institute. They got together real quick and threw this measure on there to basically try to get people fooled into repealing it, so that if you vote. That's really what it is. You go ahead and research it yourself, obviously. But the bottom line is if you vote yes on this bill, that means you're saying keep those taxes. If you vote no, it's basically saying do the Koch brothers bidding and kill those taxes. That's what it's for. So I'm just calling for that reason.
Okay.
It's Measure 101. It's January 23rd in Oregon.
Okay. Oregon voters, pay attention. And I will, too. Will, thank you for that. Thank you very much. It's great to have good explanations of things. Charles in Opelika, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing today, Tom?
Good.
Just got a question. I've been asking you different things about Donald Trump and the Russians, and now it seems as if somebody gave him permission, or they're starting to get the type of influence that now it seems like they are the ones that's going to be, or supposed to be holding talks in Sochi with the United States and North Korea. Is this true?
I don't know. What did I miss, Charles? Part of what you were saying I couldn't quite hear. I had to turn up my volume here. Summarize your question again real quick. Russia and North Korea are supposed to be negotiating in Sochi? Is that what you said?
With the United States. And I'd like to know who gave them this permission. And, I mean, are we in the twilight zone?
Well, no. I mean, Russia has a border with North Korea, something that I didn't know just a few months ago. Russia shares a border with North Korea, as does China. And you know, Russia's a nuclear power and, you know, major force in the world, a member of the UN Security Council. And, you know, if we can get them to help us, and we've been certainly working with China on this all along, who is arguably, I would say, at least economically, more of a competitor to the United States than Russia is. If we can get Russia and China on board to work out something with North Korea that's not going to end in a new Korean war, that would be a good thing, Charles.
But I'll be honest with you, that sounds like a Donald Trump campaign slogan right there. I understand, but it's just...
Well, you know, Charles, a stop clock is right twice a day. I mean, just because Donald Trump says it doesn't mean it's automatically evil or wrong. You know, I think having a better relationship with fill-in-the-blank country is probably a good idea. Even, you know, whether it's Zimbabwe or North Korea or Russia, it's like, you know, we should have relations that work to our benefit and that work to the benefit of world peace. I mean, that's the whole point of the UN. The UN, not something that Donald Trump seems real big on. I mean, we just cut back, you know, by a couple $100 million our support for the UN after this Israel vote. But you know, I think
that's what Republicans have been asking for, and conservatives to try to defund the UN.
Yeah, there you go. Charles, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back, Kim in San Francisco. Hey, Kim, what's on your mind today?
Well, I just wanted to say you were talking about Kathy Griffin early, and I've been wondering about Billy Bush and wondering that here's this man doing his job. He's always been a gracious host. He's a little bright sunshine thing, and he ends up having his whole career trashed because of Trump, and now Trump's going after Kathy Griffin. And some of the quotes that I read of comments from people were so barbaric and heinous. Like,
oh, she's getting death threats.
And that's what I mean. I mean, it's just disgusting. And Billy Bush, too, I don't understand. What did they expect him to do? Stand up and go, Donald, quit talking like this. No, he's gracious. He's doing his job. He's gracious to all the people that he hosts.
Right.
I don't understand how he ends up losing his career over it. I think it's absurd.
He laughed, which is being asserted by, you know, the people who are all upset about Billy Bush. His laughter, it was asserted, was a validation of Trump's claims or a support of Trump's claims. I personally think his laughter was nervous laughter. I think he was horribly embarrassed by what Trump was saying.
I was going to say that's an assumption. Who's to say that wasn't, you know, he was just so taken aback with the shock value of this sentence.
Well, and not only that, you know, Billy Bush is, you know, on the one hand, I guess he's a Bush cousin, but on the other hand, he's a media guy. And people in the media generally know that when you're wearing a wireless mic and it's turned on, you're on a hot mic. And,
that's right.
You know, well, Donald Trump should have known that, too. I mean, he's a media person as well. But, you know, I guess this stuff happens.
He's the president, and Billy Bush is unemployed, running around trying to get gigs doing speaker events at colleges or whatever. It's ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. So are you suggesting that Billy Bush, you know, actually, have you seen I've seen several articles in the last month or so that had Billy Bush in them. It looks to me like he's trying to rehabilitate himself. You think that's possible?
Rehabilitate himself from what? Doing his job?
From having been, you know, in the same vicinity as Donald Trump for longer than 20 minutes. It seems like whoever that happens to ends up, you know, having to do some serious mud washing.
That is just so wrong.
I agree.
It's ridiculous.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
They ought to put him right back at his old job, because that's all he was doing his job. And I prefer his work compared to the other hosts that they have right now.
Yeah. Well, I've not seen the show, so I can't comment on that. But I do think that, you know, Billy Bush got the short end of the stick here, and you know on the other hand,
two professional people that he's trashed their careers. I mean,
oh yeah. Yeah. On the other hand, I suspect that given the whole Me Too campaign and everything that's gone on, you know, the Harvey Weinstein stuff and all this other stuff, that there's a very good chance that the next time Billy Bush is in that kind of situation, he's actually going to react differently.
Right.
Which is, and not just Billy Bush. I mean, the Billy Bushes of the world, right? The subordinates who are in the presence of powerful people who, particularly powerful men, who are making misogynistic or sexist or racist remarks or whatever it may be. I have a feeling that going forward now, 2018 and beyond, you're going to get not 100%, maybe 30 or 40%, but still something culturally consequential difference in the way that, in particular, men react to this. Kim, thanks for the call. Great to hear from you. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, Professor Richard Wolff will be with us at the top of the next hour. And I just got a story from the Trump crime family. It's an email from the Trump crime family, excuse me. This one theoretically is from Donald J. Trump himself. And it says, at President Trump's request, well, I guess it's not from him himself. Who signed it? Team Trump. Okay. At President Trump's request, Thomas, we are holding a contest to name the 27. This is what goes out. I gave $5 to the campaign a year and a half ago, as I did most of the campaigns, just to get on their mailing lists. And I'm still on the mailing list. And almost every day I get a fundraising pitch from Donald Trump or his family or his wife or his daughter or his son-in-law, or whatever. So anyhow, at President Trump's request, we're holding a contest to name the 2017 King of Fake News. And we want to hear from you. And then you click the link, and it takes you to a Trump-Pence page. Poll, Crown the King of Fake News. Number one, ABC News mistakenly reported that candidate Trump directed Michael Flynn to make contact with Russian officials before the election. Verdict, fake news, faker news, fakest news. Number two, CNN mistakenly reported that candidate Donald Trump and his son Donald Trump Jr. had access to hacked documents from WikiLeaks. Verdict, fake news, faker news, fakest news. Number three, Time mistakenly reported that Donald Trump removed a bust of Martin Luther King Jr. from the Oval Office. Verdict, fake news, the same thing. If that's all you got, I mean, if that is the extent of what the Trump crime family has, I think they're running on fumes. Robert in Columbia, Tennessee. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thank you. My thought this morning is about it's funny you mentioned the crime family. What do you think about the thought that the United States government now, the Congress, is basically a criminal enterprise in the sense that rather than taking in our tax money and distributing the money for the betterment of the population, the money is basically laundered, in my opinion, to the very wealthy who contribute to the government. And also, I wonder your thought as an individual, what a person might do to combat that. One thing that comes to my mind is you wouldn't send them money. And the second thing would be that maybe you don't participate in their elections.
Yeah, I think that's
extreme, but we're living in extreme times.
Yeah, I get it, Robert. Not participating in elections, though, is it's sort of like saying, I'm not going to go to that party because, oh no, it's not. I can't think of a good metaphor, but it's not the right thing to do. What we need to do is double our participation in the elections. I talked about this yesterday with the whole 279 thing. We need to get to that threshold where we've got 60 members, 60 Democrats in the Senate, 218 Democrats in the House of Representatives, and a Democrat in the White House, and hopefully, a couple more progressives on the Supreme Court. With regard to your question about is the U.S. government a criminal enterprise, No, the government is not. It can't be by definition. But that said, I have said for some time that I think that some of the activities that the Republican Party in particular has engaged in, including suppression of the vote, targeted suppression of the vote, with, to quote I believe it was the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, with surgical precision. And they were talking about one of the Carolinas, North or South Carolina, I think it was South Carolina's redistricting maps, that they were designed and voter, and then you've got other places where, for example, they said you must have ID, and then they closed all the driver's license offices leading up to the election in the neighborhoods that were largely African American. Those kinds of things that have been coordinated by Republican candidates, by the Republican Party, to the extent that they've been coordinated, in my opinion, qualify them for prosecution under the Racketeering, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act, the RICO Act. And, so, yeah, I think that there are people within the Republican Party, some of them are elected, some of them are not, who are behaving in ways that are arguably criminal and could be held to account. But, our government itself, no, the problem with our government itself is that it's getting, to quote Milton Mayer's Nazi friend, more and more remote from the people. And that's really a very, very great danger. Robert, thank you for the call. Brent, in Hillard, is it Hilliard, Ohio? Hey, Brent, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to take a minute. I'm a Democrat, but I'm a pretty moderate one. And I'm semi-active. And I have to say there seems to be, from particularly the more progressive folks that I know that are more liberal than I am, that I'm around, they seem to have a very positive outlook on the 2018 midterms, because they seem to believe that there's going to be this raging vote in opposition to Donald Trump that's going to come out and possibly get us. They think the House is nearly a lock and the Senate is in play. Yeah. And I think that neither of those two things are true or even remotely close to true.
I think that I'm somewhere in the middle, Brent. I believe that, well, first of all, we know from history that there has only been one time since Dwight Eisenhower was elected, that since the 52 election, there's only been, and before that, you could say, wars, World War II, World War I, everything, just made everything an anomaly. But since the Eisenhower election, there's only been one time where in the second year of a new presidency, the first midterm election, the president's party did not lose seats in the House and Senate. There's only been one time that happened. And I think it was one of Eisenhower's 2 terms, or maybe it was Eisenhower's first term. I could be wrong. But so that said, we know that the Republicans in all probability are going to lose some seats. But in the Senate, you've got a whole lot more, 2-to-1, more Democrats running for re-election than Republicans. And that's a danger to Democrats. And in the House of Representatives, you've got such a heavily gerrymandered map that there are, there's a number of states where the majority, Michigan, Pennsylvania, where the majority of the people in the state vote for Democrats to send them to Congress, but the state itself sends mostly Republicans to Congress. And it's purely because of gerrymandering. That has to change. I mean, there's all these structural impediments that need to change. But I'm with you, Brent. I'm a lot more sanguine about this coming election than many people. And it's the reason why I think it's so important that we encourage everybody to make sure that you're registered to vote and get out there.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Elizabeth Kolbert's book, The Sixth Extinction, An Unnatural History. This is from the prologue. Beginnings, it's said, are apt to be shadowy. So it is with this story, which starts with the emergence of a new species, perhaps 200,000 years ago. The species does not yet have a name, nothing does, but it has the capacity to name things. As with any young species, this one's position is precarious. Its numbers are small and its range restricted to a slice of eastern Africa. Still, its population grows, but quite possibly when it contracts again, some would claim near fatally, to just a few thousand pairs. The members of the species are not particularly swift or strong or fertile. They are, however, singularly resourceful. Gradually, they push into regions with different climates, different predators, and different prey. None of the usual constraints of habitat or geography seem to check them. They cross rivers, plateaus, mountain ranges. In coastal regions, they gather shellfish. Farther inland, they hunt mammals. Everywhere they settle, they adapt and innovate. On reaching Europe, they encounter creatures very much like themselves, but stockier and probably brawnier, who have been living on the continent far longer. They interbreed with these creatures and then, by one means or another, kill them off. The end of this affair will turn out to be exemplary. As the species expands its range, it crosses paths with animals twice, 10, even 20 times its size. Huge cats, towering bears, turtle as big as elephants, sloths that stand 15 feet tall. These species are more powerful and even fiercer, but they are slow to breed and thus are wiped out. Although a land animal, our species, ever inventive, crosses the sea. It reaches islands inhabited by evolution's outliers, birds that lay foot-long eggs, pig-sized hippos, giant skinks. Accustomed to isolation, these creatures are ill-equipped to deal with the newcomers or their fellow travelers, mostly rats. Many of them, too, succumb. The process continues in fits and starts for thousands of years until the species, no longer new, has spread to practically every corner of the globe. At this point, several things happen more or less at once that allow Homo sapiens, as it has come to call itself, to reproduce at an unprecedented rate. In a single century, the population doubles. Then it doubles again, and then again. Vast forests are raised. Humans do this deliberately in order to feed themselves. Less deliberately, they shift organisms from one continent to another, reassembling the biosphere. Meanwhile, an even stranger and more radical transformation is underway. Having discovered subterranean reserves of energy, humans begin to change the composition of the atmosphere. This, in turn, alters the climate and the chemistry of the oceans. Some plants and animals adjust by moving. They climb mountains and migrate toward the poles. But a great many, at first hundreds, then thousands, and finally perhaps millions, find themselves marooned. Extinction rates soar, and the texture of life changes. No creature has ever altered life on a planet in this way before, and yet other comparable events have occurred. Very, very occasionally in the distant past, the planet has undergone change so wrenching that the diversity of life has plummeted. 5 of these ancient events were catastrophic enough that they're put in their own category, the so-called Big Five. What seems like a fantastic coincidence, but is probably no coincidence at all, the history of these events is recovered just as people come to realize that they're causing another one. When it's still too early to say whether it will reach the proportions of the Big Five, it becomes known as the Sixth Extinction. The story of the Sixth Extinction, at least as I've chosen to tell it, comes in 13 chapters. Each tracks a species that is in some way emblematic. The American mastodon, the great auk, an ammonite that disappeared at the end of the Cretaceous alongside the dinosaurs. The creatures in the early chapters are already gone. And this part of the book is mostly concerned with the great extinctions of the past and the twisting history of their discovery, starting with the work of the French nationalist Georges Cuvier. The second part of the book takes place very much in the present, in the increasingly fragmented Amazon rainforest, on a fast-warming slope in the Andes, and on the outer reaches of the Great Barrier Reef. I chose to go to these particular locations for the usual journalistic reasons, because there was a research station or because someone invited me to tag along on an expedition. Such is the scope of the changes now taking place that I could have gone pretty much anywhere, and with the proper guidance, found signs of them. One chapter concerns a die-off happening more or less in my own backyard and quite possibly in yours. If extinction is a morbid topic, mass extinction is, well, massively so. It's also a fascinating one. In the pages that follow, I try to convey both sides, the excitement of what's being learned, as well as the horror of it. My hope is that readers of this book will come away with an appreciation of the truly extraordinary moment in which we live. And then jumping to page 15. The same way acoustical engineers speak of background noise, biologists talk about background extinction. In ordinary times, times here understood to mean whole geological epochs, extinction takes place only very rarely, more rarely than even than speciation, and it occurs at what's known as the background extinction rate. This rate varies from one group of organisms to another. Often it's expressed in terms of extinctions per million species years. Calculating the background extinction rate is a laborious task that entails combing through whole databases worth of fossils. And then she goes on to talk mammals, it's about 0.25 per million species years. So on. The book, The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So what is the state of our economy today? Where are we? Where are we going? What are the possibilities? What are the futures? We talked a little bit in the first hour about how Sweden and many of the Northern European, Western European countries are not only not fearing automation and robots, but embracing them because they have a strong social safety net. And you know, there's a whole bunch of ways to go on that. Let's check in with Dr. Richard Wolff. Professor Wolff is the author of numerous books, including his most recent Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown. His website, democracyatwork.info or rdwolf with 2fs.com. And you can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, as in Professor Wolff, PROFWOLFF, or at democracy at WRK. Dr. Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
Great having you with us. I ran across a piece by Dean Baker yesterday on Alternate. I think it was originally published on Truthout. And Dean's an economist who I've followed for years and who I respect. I disagree with him on some things, specifically trade, but broadly speaking, in any case, in his piece, he argues that the stock market might be a little high right now, but it's not bubble high, and that the housing market might be a little high, but it's not bubble high. But I keep reading articles in places like Financial Times suggesting that both of them are way out of proportion to where they should be. What's the real story in your mind? I'm not asking you to contradict Dean Baker or whatever. I mean, just your thoughts independent of whatever he has to say.
Well, I don't mind mentioning that. Like you, I follow his work. I read it. I've learned a lot. I respect what he does. But like you, I also have moments of disagreement. And frankly, I didn't understand the point of this piece. Most of the business press that I read, which is conventional, pro-business commentary, is extremely worried about all of the signs of bubble mania, if you like, that are proliferating in the world economy. The peak of it all has been the lunacy around Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies. Let's all just remember that Bitcoin is nothing. It's an electronic image. It has no substance whatsoever. It is purely a speculative play, as it's called the Western market world, which means that people who are not satisfied with the rates of return they can get as investors on all kinds of other investments start literally gambling, buying something where the only purpose is to be able to sell it at a higher price to someone more gullible down the line. And Bitcoin behaved exactly like bubbles do when you craziness. And so for me, when I look at the prices of stocks, when I look at the prices of housing, I see unsustainable levels of price that the mass of Americans can't afford. Now, it's true, you never know in those situations whether it will come to a bad end tomorrow, next month, or next year. But come to a bad end, it always has. And that's what I found surprising in the article. Capitalism is a fundamentally unstable system. It has had crises every 4 to 7 years for 300 years. Yes, that's an average, so sometimes it can last longer. This one, since we count back to 2009, has lasted longer than most, but all of the logic of this system and the logic of mathematics suggests we are in trouble, and it's not a question of whether, but only when the catastrophe down, which of course will be worse because it has taken so long to get there, and that's the reality we ought to be dealing with.
Right. You write about Teva Pharma layoffs of 14,000 workers, and you also, along with your wife, wrote a piece for Alternate, The Ties That Bind Sexual Assault, Gender, and 21st Century Capitalism. In the roughly 4.5 minutes we have left until we hit a hard break, I'm wondering your thoughts on those two issues.
Well, it really is the capitalist system. First with Teva. The Israeli government, democracy, or at least what they call democracy over there, generates $6 billion in subsidies to this huge generic pharmaceutical company. And that's a decision supposedly made in the name of everybody democratically. But when it comes time to the company to decide whether to maintain or to keep jobs or to fire people, it's a tiny board, 12 members, who decide to fire, in this case, 14,000 people as the Christmas Hanukkah gift to the Israeli working class and to workers in other countries where they're busy. It is a clear example of democracy when it comes to subsidize the corporation, but no democracy at all when it comes to doing what's profitable for the corporation, but disastrous for large numbers of people. And the same thing applies to sexual assault. I'm amazed. Look, the fundamental issue here is that if you put a few people in a position to take away the jobs and incomes of large numbers of people, you're going to have abuse. Sexual abuse, but every other kind of abuse, because you've got so many people's lives in the hands of a tiny number of people not accountable to those over whom they rule. This is a recipe that has led us to get rid of monarchies in the past, of feudalism in the past, and why we allow this in the workplace is amazing. And then to be surprised that those with this extraordinary unaccountable power abuse it, that I find even more amazing, and I'm only glad that it's coming out now, but I hope it doesn't become an appeal for people to behave differently rather than to change an underlying structure which fosters the very problem.
So you talk about that there's a certain intrinsic to capitalism piece to this thing. Worker-owned co-ops. I mean, it seems like you're always going to have situations where people have power over other people.
Absolutely, but the question, and then democracy was always the question: can you make that maximally accountable? In a worker co-op, no one person, no 4 people have decision-making over the jobs of thousands or hundreds, because you make the whole employer the collectivity of all. So if you're going to fire people, that has to be worked out with everybody. Every alternative to that has to be looked at equally. No small group of people can profit by choosing an alternative, say mass layoffs like in Teva, rather than some other way to make this enterprise succeed. Is it a guarantee? No, there are no guarantees. But is it a better way than having a hierarchy which lets the folks at the top behave? Look, in this last year, we've seen that hierarchies in churches, hierarchies in politics have led to unbelievable abuse. The same applies in the workplace, and the same logic of changing the structure so that you do not enable the people who have problems to work them off on others. That's at least as much as we've learned as a human community that democracy is the way forward, and the only mystery is why we haven't instituted it at the workplace where the same logic applies.
Well, unions have for years, we have 30 seconds left, Professor Wolf. Unions for years have argued that what they are offering is democracy in the workplace, but that has never stuck as a meme. How do we promote it?
Well, the problem with unions is they always wanted to pass a law or to sign a contract, but it left the ultimate power in the hands of somebody else, the employer. And that other person has had the way to get around whatever the deal was. The reason you want to work a co-op is you're no longer dealing with an adversary because you yourself have become the employer as well as the employee, and that's a better way to go.
So that's true democracy in the workplace. Got it. Professor Richard Wolff, economist, co-founder of Democracy at Work, author of Capitalism Crisis Deepens. Thank you, sir, for being with us today.
My pleasure, Tom, and look forward to the next time.
Me too. Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Welcome back. John in Topanga, California. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Tom, thanks for your inspiration. I have a question that I think Professor Wolff may have stirred my mind a couple of years back. If the Emancipation Proclamation declared men free, and the Supreme Court of the United States declared a corporation a person, how can one corporation own another corporation?
All right, that's one of the many, what would you call it, intellectual fallacies or logical fallacies that pop up when you talk about corporate personhood. In 1886, in Washington, D.C., the Supreme Court, Delphine Delmas, who was a lawyer from California who had, on a pro bono case, saved the California redwoods single-handedly. He argued on behalf of Santa Clara County that before the U.S. Supreme Court, he argued that well, actually, let me flip it around. Sanderson, I forget Sanderson's first name. I think it was Raymond, but anyhow, Sanderson was the name of the lawyer for the railroads. And he was arguing that it was illegal for Santa Clara County to have to pay a higher tax rate or to charge a higher tax rate to the railroads than Santa Ana County did, because if the railroads are paying different taxes in two different counties, that's unequal protection under the law under the 14th Amendment. And the judge in the case said, no, that's not unequal protection under the law. And as a corporation, we're not even going to address whether you're entitled to equal protection under the law. That's not what this case is about. This case is about whether you should pay the taxes or not. You have to pay the taxes. The railroads lost the case, but the author of the case, his name was John Chandler Bancroft Davis. His father was the governor of Massachusetts. He was very, very wealthy. He was the president of the B&O Railroad for a while before he became clerk of the Supreme Court. And the clerk was the only guy who was in D.C. 12 months out of the year and who basically ran the Supreme Court. In many ways, he had more power than any individual justice back in the 19th century. And what he did was he wrote into the head note, which is a commentary on the case, which has no legal standing. He wrote into the head note that the Chief Justice had said, well, we all agree that corporations are persons. Well, he completely took the Chief Justice's words out of context, and he completely contradicted the decision. The Supreme Court never ruled that corporations are people. But then there was this 10-year campaign. I write about this in my book, Unequal Protection, which you can read free online over at Truthout's website. There was this 10-year campaign financed by the railroads, to take a retired congressman and a retired senator. One was Conklin, and I forget the name of the other one. And these two guys were on the committee that wrote the 14th Amendment. And the railroads put them on a road show traveling around the United States saying that in the 14th Amendment, where it says no person shall be denied equal protection under the law, they were very careful not to say no natural person, which is typically how laws refer to human beings, as opposed to corporations, churches, and governments, which are all considered artificial persons. They do have some personhood because they have to pay taxes and they can sue and be sued. And that's where it all began, John. The thing has been a scam since 1886. And you know, a lot of people are starting to wake up to this. It's, you know, like I said yesterday, I love the old bumper sticker. I'll believe a corporation's a person when Texas executes one. John, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. At the same time that here in the United States, we're sitting around having you know, wars with each other about how much we should cut the taxes on billionaires and not spend anything on maintaining infrastructure. I mean, we've been doing this since Reagan changed the whole dynamic of American governance. And our roads started to fall apart, and our bridges started to fall apart, and our sewage system started to fall apart, and our water system started to fall apart. And our telephone systems became cranky and creaky and anachronistic. And, you know, as the government built out the internet, pretty soon that got privatized, just like our railroads got privatized. So pretty soon you're going to have, you know, internet services just as crappy as our rail lines are in the United States compared to other countries. While we're doing all this, while we're descending into third world status thanks to Republican efforts to claw money out of our government, away from we the people, and hand it to the billionaires in the Koch network and their friends. While that's all going on, Euronews is reporting in the eastern province of Shandong, a new solar-powered highway has opened. The road is constructed using solar panels, which have a thin sheet of clear concrete on top of them, protecting the service. The innovative panels are built to transfer energy to electric vehicles passing on top of them and to instantly melt snow. It's amazing. They're building solar highways in China while we can't even make a damn railroad work. We're still fighting about positive train control, something that went into effect in the 1900s. Excuse me, in the 1800s, in the 19th century, you know, well, it wasn't positive train control, but it was some variation on it, and this technology's been, I mean, we're arguing about this, really? It's incredible. Bill in Sebastian, Florida. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
All right, Tom. I thank you again for your show. You're a blessing. And I just wanted to make two comments. One is about the tax bill. By not reading the tax bill and passing it is the same as convicting someone without listening to the trial.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's a much better metaphor.
Yeah, that's one point. And the other one is the other day on C-SPAN, I spoke with this Professor Buckley from George Mason University. And he was brought from Canada specifically brought down here. He's teaching at Mason University.
later years as a bookkeeper manager for a Michigan tool and die company as 3 more sons were born. Carl knew he was doing the right thing when he took that job in the factory, and he did it enthusiastically because the auto Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Tom in Grand Rapids, Michigan, listening to WGVU. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Oh, first of all, I like your story. Your dad is awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And second, I'm doing what you talk about all the time. I'm running against Bill Huizenga, the 2nd Congressional District in Michigan, and decided to drop out of the race because there's a better candidate, Dr. Rob Davison, who's running, and I'm going to do what you say. We're going to try to oust him from getting a better candidate that's progressive. And my question is, have you ever thought about getting my favorite 3 progressives together? That's Robert Reich, Bernie Sanders, and yourself in a debate against some of these talking heads. Because I'll tell you, I'd love to see you actually get in a duel with these guys, because they would lose so bad.
Yeah.
Against any of them. But anyway, I wish you all the luck, and keep the progressive talk up, because I'm doing what you say and you talk about all the time. I'm not going to complain about Republicans. We're going to work hard to replace them.
There you go. Good on you, Tom. Congratulations. And in fact, Tom, I'm going to designate you as our caller of the day. I don't know if you've noticed, but on our set there is now some Donald Trump toilet paper. And if you would like a roll of Donald Trump toilet paper, I can put you on hold, and Arthur will take your shipping information, and as our caller of the day, you will receive one. How's that?
Well, I've got a Trump supporter 2 doors down. He's going to be real surprised.
Okay, let me put you on hold, Tom. Arthur, actually, I think Arthur's talking to somebody. Arthur, Tom is on line 5. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, not too much, Tom. I wanted to ask you about a historic similarity and see if you have a take on it at all. I've noticed that, given the state of the global economy and really just the benefit of mutual defense agreements, they seem to be on the rise, right? And it's very similar to World War II.
World War I.
Now, well, and World War I for that matter, yes.
I mean, that was what caused World War I. I mean, when Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, it started a series of dominoes falling, none of which were, things that nations decided they wanted. They were all or not, at least initially, they were all the execution of mutual defense contracts, basically, of treaties. But anyhow, back to you, Dave.
Yeah. Well, yeah, mutual defense agreements are just better. They're just more effective. And, especially if your economy's in shambles. But the Nikki Haley and this zeal to defund or to at least reduce significantly the funds we give to the United Nations, we, the United States.
Right.
The United States didn't even participate in the League of Nations. Russia was expelled and Germany withdrew. And I'm seeing this similarity where we might be setting ourselves up for another world war. And I just wonder if you had a, opinion on that.
Yeah. For people who don't know what you're talking about, after World War I, Woodrow Wilson's big dream was the League of Nations, basically what we call the United Nations today. It was formed and then it collapsed essentially, and didn't survive, and so it was not able to be used as a tool to mediate or moderate the behaviors of the Germans and the Japanese during World War II. So, there's, and the extent to which the United States might be successful in damaging, destroying, or defunding the United Nations could be extraordinarily destructive in terms of the potential for world peace. But to put it in perspective, I think this is more bluster for the base than it is, reality. The budget of the UN is over $5 billion a year. My recollection is it's 5.69, but I might be mixing numbers up somewhere. But it's between $5 and $6 billion a year. What the amount by which Nikki Haley announced that the United States has reduced its contribution to the United States was $238 million, as I recall, something like that. It was a couple $100 million, maybe as much as $300 million, and which is a very, very small piece of that. So I think it was more symbolic, which is not to say millions, a couple $100 million doesn't mean a lot for the United Nations, but I don't think that the core peacekeeping functions are going to be hurt or the diplomatic functions are going to be hurt. What's going to be hurt are the functions of the United Nations, where the United Nations and we, we are big supporters of the United Nations, we, the United States, where we are using the UN to reduce child poverty, to increase the rights of women around the world, to vaccinate children, to deal with famines, to deal with dislocated and refugees and whatnot, dislocated people. All those things arguably increase the risk of war. So I think your point is well taken, Dave. But does that make sense?
Yeah, totally, Tom. I always appreciate your perspective.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dave. Thanks for the call. I appreciate it. Annie in Boise, Idaho. Hey, Annie, what's up?
I would just want to, concerning Kathy Griffin, I just wanted to talk about the whole Ted Nugent hypocrisy. That, not only was he invited on CNN back in 2011 to explain himself after he said he wanted to show President Obama the butt of his gun, but, cut to President Trump being elected, and he's invited into the Oval Office to pose for a picture with the sitting president of the United States. I think that's horrible that he didn't have to go away the way Kathy Griffin has had to.
Yeah, well, the left doesn't have an outrage machine like the right does, because the left doesn't own big media properties like the right does. And so it's a lot harder for the left to stir up that kind of outrage. But yeah, Ted Nugent was, and not only that, Kathy Griffin was doing it as a joke. Ted Nugent does it as political commentary, which makes it all, arguably it was a joke that was political commentary on the part of Kathy Griffin, but she's a comedian. Ted Nugent is not. He's a musician and maybe wannabe politician and Fox News guy, but anyhow, excellent point, Annie. Excellent point.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good talking with you. Anita in San Antonio. Hey, Anita, you wanted to talk about Billy Bush?
Yes. The woman that called that defended Billy Bush, I was so offended by that tape. I can't even listen to it. When I hear him laugh like that and egg him on and encourage him and then repeat what he says, and what Donald Trump was saying, he was bragging about sexually assaulting women,
Yep.
and he laughed about that. If he had been saying something racist or something anti-Semitic, we would not be defending him. He should have been fired. Donald Trump should have been forced to leave the race.
Well, what I have to say, Anita, is that as a man in this culture, I haven't done this in decades, but certainly there have been times in my life where people have told racist, sexist, misogynistic, whatever jokes around me, and either it embarrassed me or I just was not willing to get into it, and I just laughed it off. And my sense of it is that was what Billy Bush was doing. Now, I may be totally wrong on this, but I just don't see him as a guy who delights in attacking women.
Well, maybe you're probably right. I'm sure he doesn't delight in attacking women. I'm not saying that, but we cannot allow people, when you don't stand up, when somebody makes a racist joke or an anti-Semitic joke or a misogynist joke like that or something bragging about sexual assault, what are you telling that person?
What Billy Bush was telling Donald Trump was what he knew to be real, which is at that point, Donald Trump was 10 times the star Billy Bush was, had a huge contract with NBC, and was in a position to destroy Billy Bush's career with one phone call if he chose to. And Billy Bush knew that. And so I doubt that, particularly in show business, which is a very, very dynamic and fluid business and a lot of which depends on relationships. I doubt Billy Bush, would you have been willing to lose your entire, career by calling out somebody? Well, you probably would have been, Anita.
Well, no. Well, maybe, but you know what? I would not have laughed about it, and I wouldn't have encouraged it. And then if he would have tried to, have me fired for whatever or punished in some way, I would have told him what he said, and it would have been on tape.
But see, I think that would have had impact today. I don't think that would have had impact 3 years ago when it happened, or 10 years ago when it happened, whatever it happened, 8 years ago.
But if he had been saying something racist and we all heard it, would we have thought it was okay for Billy Bush to keep his job?
No, well, that's the thing. Our tolerance for racism, our threshold for outrage around racism, at least most white people's tolerance for the racist threshold changed really substantially in the 60s and 70s. But we still haven't even, we passed the civil rights legislation in the 60s. We still have not passed the Equal Rights Amendment.
It's still right. I know that, but it still should not be okay. It still
we had a black president before we had a female president, Anita.
Right, Tom. I understand that, but if we heard something, even if it was from the 1960s, we heard somebody that was a public, figure saying something racist, and encouraging somebody or laughing about it and encouraging a racist joke or an anti-Semitic joke, we would still be offended, and he probably would still have lost his job.
In public, I would completely agree with you. In private, and that was considered in private, by the network and by the people who were there. I just
still not okay.
I agree, it's not okay. And as I said before, I think that a lot of men's behavior is changing right now as we speak, and certainly probably an entire generation's behavior. People under 30 right now is changing as a consequence of this. But I continue to think that Billy Bush, and frankly, it's like so many people get around Donald Trump, and he's a very imposing, large, powerful man and wealthy, powerful man. They get around him, and they just get destroyed by him. I mean, the man is like he's like a walking, demonic possession or something. I mean, it's.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I understand there's nuance, and we should try to understand why he reacted the way he did. But and I'm not the type, like with Al Franken and the things that went on with him. I don't think Al Franken should have been forced to resign, and I don't particularly like the way Kristen Gillibrand handled any of that. But this thing with Billy Bush, I don't think it should be defended.
Okay, I got it. Anita, we will agree to disagree. It's not something I feel all that strongly about, but yeah, I'm with you. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back, John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, along with political power, and corporate power mixing together in this country, we also have, I would say, religion. And I think all of those together is a very potent force and can easily move towards fascism. And if you look at the rhetoric and what, say, like people like Jeff Sessions has said or Roy Moore has said, they are following, there's a theologian, an evangelical theologian named Rousas Russdoony. It's an interesting name, but anyway, they advocate Christian Reconstructionism. And, they do not respect free will. They do not respect democracy. I mean, they've actually even said things like Christianity and democracy are inevitable enemies.
Yes, and the democracy, and Rushdoony called democracy mob rule, although he wasn't the first. I mean, John Adams called it that, too.
I find this really frightening that I think that they are, and they also believe not in revolution, but a gradual taking over, which they've been able to do. I think they're moving in that direction, and I think we could easily end up with a system like, or a government like Gilead in, let's see, it's the Handmaid's Tale. And, she was way ahead of her time because I think that was written in the early 80s.
I have not read the book. I'm sorry, John.
Yeah,
I
haven't
only
read
saw
it,
the first half of the first episode of the movie or the TV series.
The theme is essentially, a fascist Christian state.
Right.
And, it's basically, revolves around a very interesting take on Calvinism. And I think that Calvinism essentially, if you follow the tenets of it, is totalitarian, predestination, deterministic. You can think of it in the same terms as Marxism or a fascism. I don't really see the difference, in what they're proposing because they don't believe in a free will. They really don't. And I think that, their tenets are antithetical to Christianity because Christianity, particularly in the East, but even in the Catholic West, they recognize free will. And they also recognize that even after the fall, that, there was still something good about humanity, whereas the Calvinists just think of us as being,
Well, Calvinism is rooted in original sin.
And that mankind can't really even make, choices without, believing.
Yeah, Calvinism is rooted in original sin, as as is much of Christian theology. But I mean, they even put their economic theology at the front of that.
That's interesting because in the East they just they don't look at it as a sin, but as a falling away of this perfect ideal world that existed in the garden, and that what happens is when Christ comes, he doesn't go to, he's not there to pay a price for our sins. He's there to bring us back to this state of nature that, we
back to grace.
had.
Yep, I'm with you. John, thank you for the call. And I would add, by the way, you started talking about how we've got this corporate state and now we're getting a Christian state. I would say increasingly large chunks of the Christian church, particularly the mega churches, are looking like corporations. John, thank you for the call. Welcome back. John in Chicago. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hey, Tom, thanks for taking the call. I just wanted to comment to how there's so much in common between working poor minorities and working poor white people. You go to a Walmart on a Friday night in central Illinois, and holy cow, you're looking at people who make $30,000 a year and think they're middle class.
Yeah.
Most are working poor and not middle class. They might be lower middle class, or they have their own subsidy from programs that they get. I think we've got to find a way to unite the working poor, no matter the race. And I think that could be a winning strategy for Democrats in 2018 and 2020 to kind of tie us all together. Because I think the thing is, most poor white people feel like, hey, at least I'm not black or Mexican. And even though they maybe have the same wage level, and it's better, it's a way of dividing us, where the poor whites have less in common with the affluent, myself included, than they do with the working poor, who are minorities.
Yeah, no, it's true, John, and it's a modern-day illustration of when Lyndon Johnson laid out his opinion of the Republican strategy, which was, if you can convince the lowest white person that he's superior to the highest black person, he'll let you pick his pocket and won't complain about it. I'm paraphrasing, but words to that effect. And that's exactly, that's been the Republican strategy ever since LBJ got the Civil Rights Act passed. And, yeah, spot on. And that's this is what people have to get. And our media, of course, is not doing anything to help people get this. So,
hey, a quick double dip, if I may,
yeah.
Real quick. Okay, the professor talked earlier when he was talking about co-ops and everything like that. The thing is, like in Germany, every corporation in Germany has to have a representation of labor on their board of directors. It's part of the corporate charter system in Germany.
Right. There's a caveat to that, John. It's every corporation with more than 1,000 employees, and it's 50% of their board. 50% of their board has to be labor.
But I think that would make a big difference as far as worker representation. If we were to model a lot of things like Germany does, from an export-driven economy to like when there's a layoff coming, nobody gets laid off. Everybody takes a cut in hours. So that everybody takes a haircut.
Yeah, and, that's called the Kurzarbeit, short week, or short work rather, and that's a program that helped Germany not collapse during the crash of 2008. Was the government, employers put people on half time, but the government paid the other half of the time, so people didn't actually lose their disposable income. So purchasing power continued in Germany. So the recession never really hit Germany all that bad. And you're right. And the amazing thing about this, John, and this is the thing that most Americans don't know, is that and just look, for example, at the difference between Germany and Russia right now, right? Russia has become more and more an unequal society, much like the United States, only arguably far worse than the United States in terms of inequality and oligarchy. And Germany has become a much more egalitarian state and a much more successful democracy, small d democracy. Now, the interesting piece of this is the U.S. contribution. After World War II, Harry Truman was president. Harry Truman wanted to have the rights of labor enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. He vetoed twice Taft-Hartley. Congress overrode his veto, destroying unions. He was the first president to submit legislation calling for a national health insurance program, a national single-payer program That was Harry Truman. He couldn't get any of that through in the United States. So after World War II, Truman sat down with the leaders of Germany and said, write this stuff into your constitution. We need to prove it works. And the Germans said, cool, we'll do this. We'll give a national health care program. We'll give free education to everybody. We'll put, labor on half as a 50% representation on the board of any corporation with over 1,000 employees, et cetera. And then when the Soviet Union fell, we sent a completely different group to Russia. It was a group from the Chicago School of Economics, the disciples of Milton Friedman, including Milton himself, went to Russia and said, here's how to set up an economy. Do it along libertarian lines, very little regulation, let the banksters run everything, privatize everything, reduce government function, and guess what? Russia ends up with more inequality and more of an oligarchic nation, and Germany ends up with more equality and more of a democratic nation, because Germany took Harry Truman's advice and Russia took the prodigies of Reaganism's advice. Basically, Russia was reinvented along the lines of Reaganomics. Germany was reinvented along the lines of social democracies. So anyhow, John, I got to move along, but thanks for the call. Excellent points all. James in Wichita, Kansas. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
Hey, I have a question about where's the compromise at?
Between what?
When I hear you talking, I see the toilet paper and stuff with Donald Trump on there. So, like I told the screener, if my daughter, runs for student president and they put toilet paper with her face on that, is that okay? Isn't that a form of bullying?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I'm going to take it down. You're absolutely right.
Okay, I appreciate it. Okay, another question I have for you.
I give it to you, James.
I just because I don't understand where to compromise at.
Okay, by compromise, I understand respect, and it's disrespectful to put the president's face on toilet paper on a TV set. I agree with you, and so I just took it down, like I said. I thought, it was a funny joke, but yeah, it's not all that funny. I get it.
Okay, I respect that.
But what about what's this compromise you're talking about?
The what? Say that one more time.
What's the compromise you're talking about?
The compromise I'm meaning is like if I like to talk about the HR 38 bill, with being reciprocity, being able to carry a gun over state lines and all.
Mm-hmm.
So make me understand, how wouldn't it be okay for me to go into California with such an item if it's legal for me to do it in one state?
Because of the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment gives states, it says explicitly, any powers not reserved to the federal government in this Constitution go to the states. Devolve to the states, or whatever the exact language is.
Isn't part of the Second Amendment part of the Constitution is further along than that part? And I heard the guy say, "Well, it's about the militia and all," but I'm just saying, there's no compromise for me being in the United States if I can't cross the border with a gun to me.
The Second Amendment has been interpreted by the Supreme Court to contain a right to own guns, but that right is not an unconstrained right. And what gun control laws do, and I'm talking about laws that have to do with concealed carry permits, which are also gun control laws. What those laws do is specifically regulate guns to the desire of the individual states in compliance with the 10th Amendment. It's not at all unconstitutional.
You guys aren't compromising.
I get your argument, but you're arguing against states' rights, essentially. James, I got to run.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. on the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Elizabeth Kolbert's book, The Sixth Extinction, An Unnatural History. This is from the prologue. Beginnings, it's said, are apt to be shadowy. So it is with this story, which starts with the emergence of a new species, perhaps 200,000 years ago. The species does not yet have a name, nothing does, but it has the capacity to name things. As with any young species, this one's position is precarious. Its numbers are small and its range restricted to a slice of eastern Africa. Still, its population grows, but quite possibly when it contracts again, some would claim near fatally, to just a few thousand pairs. The members of the species are not particularly swift or strong or fertile. They are, however, singularly resourceful. Gradually, they push into regions with different climates, different predators, and different prey. None of the usual constraints of habitat or geography seem to check them. They cross rivers, plateaus, mountain ranges. In coastal regions, they gather shellfish. Farther inland, they hunt mammals. Everywhere they settle, they adapt and innovate. On reaching Europe, they encounter creatures very much like themselves, but stockier and probably brawnier, who have been living on the continent far longer. They interbreed with these creatures and then, by one means or another, kill them off. The end of this affair will turn out to be exemplary. As the species expands its range, it crosses paths with animals twice, 10, even 20 times its size. Huge cats, towering bears, turtle as big as elephants, sloths that stand 15 feet tall. These species are more powerful and even fiercer, but they are slow to breed and thus are wiped out. Although a land animal, our species, ever inventive, crosses the sea. It reaches islands inhabited by evolution's outliers, birds that lay foot-long eggs, pig-sized hippos, giant skinks. Accustomed to isolation, these creatures are ill-equipped to deal with the newcomers or their fellow travelers, mostly rats. Many of them, too, succumb. The process continues in fits and starts for thousands of years until the species, no longer new, has spread to practically every corner of the globe. At this point, several things happen more or less at once that allow Homo sapiens, as it has come to call itself, to reproduce at an unprecedented rate. In a single century, the population doubles. Then it doubles again, and then again. Vast forests are raised. Humans do this deliberately in order to feed themselves. Less deliberately, they shift organisms from one continent to another, reassembling the biosphere. Meanwhile, an even stranger and more radical transformation is underway. Having discovered subterranean reserves of energy, humans begin to change the composition of the atmosphere. This, in turn, alters the climate and the chemistry of the oceans. Some plants and animals adjust by moving. They climb mountains and migrate toward the poles. But a great many, at first hundreds, then thousands, and finally perhaps millions, find themselves marooned. Extinction rates soar, and the texture of life changes. No creature has ever altered life on a planet in this way before, and yet other comparable events have occurred. Very, very occasionally in the distant past, the planet has undergone change so wrenching that the diversity of life has plummeted. 5 of these ancient events were catastrophic enough that they're put in their own category, the so-called Big Five. What seems like a fantastic coincidence, but is probably no coincidence at all, the history of these events is recovered just as people come to realize that they're causing another one. When it's still too early to say whether it will reach the proportions of the Big Five, it becomes known as the Sixth Extinction. The story of the Sixth Extinction, at least as I've chosen to tell it, comes in 13 chapters. Each tracks a species that is in some way emblematic. The American mastodon, the great auk, an ammonite that disappeared at the end of the Cretaceous alongside the dinosaurs. The creatures in the early chapters are already gone. And this part of the book is mostly concerned with the great extinctions of the past and the twisting history of their discovery, starting with the work of the French nationalist Georges Cuvier. The second part of the book takes place very much in the present, in the increasingly fragmented Amazon rainforest, on a fast-warming slope in the Andes and on the outer reaches of the Great Barrier Reef. I chose to go to these particular locations for the usual journalistic reasons, because there was a research station or because someone invited me to tag along on an expedition. Such is the scope of the changes now taking place that I could have gone pretty much anywhere, and with the proper guidance, found signs of them. One chapter concerns a die-off happening more or less in my own backyard and quite possibly in yours. If extinction is a morbid topic, mass extinction is, well, massively so. It's also a fascinating one. In the pages that follow, I try to convey both sides, the excitement of what's being learned, as well as the horror of it. My hope is that readers of this book will come away with an appreciation of the truly extraordinary moment in which we live. And then jumping to page 15. The same way acoustical engineers speak of background noise, biologists talk about background extinction. In ordinary times, times here understood to mean whole geological epochs, extinction takes place only very rarely, more rarely than even than speciation, and it occurs at what's known as the background extinction rate. This rate varies from one group of organisms to another. Often it's expressed in terms of extinctions per million species years. Calculating the background extinction rate is a laborious task that entails combing through whole databases worth of fossils. And then she goes on to type mammals, it's about 0.25 per million species years. So on. The book, The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
In the code.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is pretty remarkable. Brad Reed over at Raw's Story. 2 black professional basketball players were kicked off an American Airlines flight after they were falsely accused of stealing blankets. The Associated Press via The Guardian reports that Trayson Burrell and Marquis Teague, who played for the minor league NBA G League team, the Memphis Hustle, were booted off a flight after a black flight attendant accused them of stealing blankets that were given to them by 2 first-class passengers. The 2 players argued that with the flight attendant that they didn't steal any blankets, and the flight attendant subsequently refused to fly with them on the plane because they made him feel unsafe. Oh, geez. This, you know, it's like these bizarre power struggles that happen in the. I fly a lot, and I've been flying for a lot of years. I mean, since the 70s, nationally and internationally. And I've watched airplane seats get smaller and smaller, and the space between them get smaller and smaller, and planes get more and more crowded as consolidation creates bigger and bigger and more efficient airlines with fewer and fewer employees and worse service. And what happens as a consequence of this is, yeah, I remember, you know, in fact, it was the flight out here to Portland, one of the last flights I was on. Maybe it wasn't the very last one, but the one before it, where whenever I crank my seat back, which is a thing that's normal and legal to do, right? Safe, everything else I'm talking about while the plane's in the air and the seatbelt sign's not on and all that. Every time I crank my seat back, the person behind me would kind of bang it with her knee. Like, you know, what are you doing? Getting that thing in my face. And you know, just clearly trying to send a message. And I sort of wanted to turn around and said, you know, I just had back surgery last year. It really, you know, 4 hours in this seat. I need to lean it back a little. But I didn't. I just ignored it. But the bottom line is what the airlines are doing is they're causing us to fight with each other. You know, people go through security. TSA has gotten, you know, particularly with the pre-program, but TSA has gotten a little more tolerable, you know, and now they're dialing back somewhat on the Michael Chertoff X-ray porno scanners. But the net of it is that by the time people get on an airplane, they're feeling pretty fried to start with. And then you've got this whole kind of you know, by jamming people into planes and having 4 and 5 classes of service, and you don't get to check a bag, and you can't carry a bag out. Oh, that bag's too big. Oh, you've got 2. Oh my God. You know, it's like the flight attendants have been put in the position of being police, a role that only a very small percentage of them seem to relish. And by the way, this is not unique to air travel. The same thing is happening, you know, in banking and in insurance. I mean, pick your industry. Customer service sucks. And why does customer service suck? Because companies are doing away with the customer service employees, and you know, in order to save more money to give to their stockholders and their CEOs. And the result is, you know, service just isn't what it used to be. Service isn't what it could be. Service isn't what it should be. And you end up with a situation like this where you've got, apparently these 2 athletes were in coach, and somebody in first class loaned them a couple of blankets for the flight. The flight attendant said, this is how I'm reading the article, and this is what it looks like happened. The flight attendant said, hey, wait a minute, you just stole those first class. No, we didn't. Somebody in first class gave them to us. Oh, you're bad boys, off the plane, right? I mean, it's just, really? I'm not sure that this had necessarily anything to do with race, but it probably had to do with race. The one thing that kind of semi-qualifies that is that the flight attendant was black, and you know, he was the one who got all upset about it. But that, you know, that doesn't mean that it couldn't have been at some level consciously or unconsciously about race. It's just that I would love to see a country where we work together, where profit isn't the only thing that matters, where we acknowledge that the reason why we have an economy is to serve the people and to serve and to produce the greatest good for the largest number of people without destroying their freedoms. I'm not talking Soviet communism here. I'm talking democratic socialism. I'm talking a strong and healthy safety net that people don't fall through. The result of that being that people feel empowered to do things like start their own businesses, leave a dead-end job and find a better one, you know, because they know that they're not going to fall. They're not going to lose their health insurance. They're not going to lose their home. You know, there's a healthy unemployment insurance during those interregnums, during those periods between jobs. All of this is together. They do this in Norway. They do this in Sweden. They do this in Denmark. They do this in Finland. They do this in Germany. They do this in France. Why can't we do this here? Why can't we say, you know, we're going to protect our small and medium-sized businesses. We are going to prevent predatory practices of very large businesses. You'll recall I started out, you know, the very first hour talking about the situation in Sweden. And because employees and employers work closely together, because the unionization rate in Sweden is like 80-some-odd%. Here it's what, 6% in the private sector, and declining. In Sweden, people are not afraid to start new jobs. In Sweden, you get a college education all the way to a PhD or an MD for free. And it's not just Sweden; it's most of the developed world. Louise and I were in Costa Rica back 3-4 months ago. I mentioned this on the air at the time, but it's worth revisiting, I think, very briefly. We went down to Costa Rica. We're doing a documentary right now on global climate change, and we were down there to film a bunch of stuff at a farm in Costa Rica that's doing regenerative agriculture. And from the airport to this farm was about a 3-hour drive, and our cab driver, and yeah, you get a cab for a drive like that, and our cab driver was just a local guy who lived kind of in the area of where the farm was. They sent him to pick us up at the airport. And so, you know, we're driving there, Louise and me, and, you know, and the guy's driving us, and I said, what do you like about Costa Rica? He's a local Costa Rican, right? A guy maybe in his 40s, I guess, late 40s, early 50s. Spoke very good English. I said, what do you like the most about Costa Rica? And he said, when I was a kid, we'd got rid of our army. And we did it so that everybody could have free college and free health care. And he said, so my son right now is going to college He said, there's no way I can afford to pay for him to go to college, but he's going to college. And my wife got sick a couple of years ago. She had I forget what it was. He was describing that she had a gallbladder or something. She had some kind of and he said, you know, if we hadn't had health insurance, it would have broken us. But there's a national health insurance program here. We didn't have to pay a penny. He said, that's what I like about Costa Rica. You know, we're not wasting our money on stupid wars and things like that. Instead, we're taking care of each other. And this from, you know, like this cab driver is like uttering like these profound truths. Why can't we figure this stuff out here in the United States? He asks rhetorically. Well, there's an answer to why we can't figure it out here in the United States. The reason we can't figure it out here in the United States is because our lines of communication, our media, are largely controlled by interests that are the products of concentrated wealth and that celebrate concentrated wealth, including, you know, the lifestyles of the rich and famous. Yes, the more the grandiose, the better. So this has become our culture. And so the natural thing from that kind of a culture would be to celebrate the pirates, basically, of our culture, the predators, the giant corporations that eat everything in their path, like giant threshing machines that just literally just eat everything. And it is destroying us. We'll be back in just a second. I got to tell you about second man in England mysteriously bursts into flames. What?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
They finally found something almost as common as voting fraud. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Juan in Carborough, North Carolina. Hey, Juan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk about, so I was listening to your talk with Professor Wolf about cryptocurrency. So just wanted to mention that this technology has a lot of potential right now. And right now, yes, it looks like it's just a gambling tool. But, you know, I want to talk about what do you think are the most important things a bank does? And why was the Federal Reserve created?
Are you asking, or are those rhetorical questions you want to answer?
No, like we should talk about, you know, I just want to put the things, you know, on the table.
Right. So, well, let me pose a rebuttal question, essentially. Why would anybody trust a currency that does not have a sovereign nation behind it?
Because cryptocurrencies could be seen, I mean, or are democratic type of currency.
But it's a marketplace. It's not a currency. Right. It's a market. You can buy and sell cryptocurrencies anywhere in the world, but they're not. And arguably, some people will take them in exchange for goods or services, but that doesn't mean that they're actually money. I mean, some people will take chickens, and, you know, Ron Paul tried to run a presidential campaign arguing that as a doctor, he got paid with chickens, and it was a fine thing, right?
Right, but the same thing, we can say the same thing about the dollar.
No, you can't, because the dollar can be redeemed. Well, it can't be redeemed for gold anymore, but the dollar is a currency that is backed by the United States of America. And whereas
what if the dollar is backed by oil?
I beg your pardon?
The dollar is backed by oil.
No, oil is backed by the dollar. The value of oil is.
They're tied together.
They are tied together because the U.S. dollar is the reserve currency of the world with regard to oil, and with regard to a lot of other things, and that may well change. But that has nothing to do with the fact that it is a sovereign currency. And there's upsides and downsides to that. I mean, you know, you wouldn't want to be investing in the Zimbabwean dollar back when Robert Mugabe was running the country and he had 10,000% annual inflation. So you had a sovereign currency that was being destroyed. But in the United States, you've got a sovereign currency that's pretty solid and pretty stable, and it has never defaulted. If you have a Bitcoin, first of all, if you're not a computer technician, how do you know that concatenation, that string of numbers, of zeros and ones, that is that Bitcoin? How do you know that that's real?
Exactly. So first of all, a cryptocurrency should be tied off, for example, to an energy resource, and there are many initiatives, going into this direction. I'm not saying cryptocurrencies is work, but cryptocurrencies are a threat to central banking systems.
I don't think so. I think the principal threat that cryptocurrencies present is to law enforcement. Cryptocurrencies are being used right now to engage in transactions that cannot be traced, and therefore, drug addiction.
Yes, but right now also there are some people working on having be able to identify who's making these transactions.
Yeah,
I think that's very important. But so the point that I wanted to make is, for example, the Federal Reserve is in charge of printing money, and the banks are also in charge of keeping transactions on who has which resources.
Juan, we're going to have to revisit this. So you're going to have to call me back next week and we'll start over, okay?
Okay.
But let's start at the beginning next time, okay? Thank you.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Howard in Manhattan. Hey, Howard, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. When I get confused when people say Trump's base is shrinking, I don't know what they're talking about. They talking about registered Republicans, people that vote for him, some survey. Can you clarify that?
Sure. What they're talking about is, I believe it was a Pew study, but I might be wrong. It was one of the reputable polling firms, might have been Gallup, one of the ones that's not considered partisan. And they just did, this was just a few weeks ago, they just did a survey of Trump voters, people who actually voted for Trump in the election. And they found that only 6% of them today would not vote for Donald Trump. 94%, well, it wasn't full 94% said that they would, but there was only 6% who said that they wouldn't. So by and large, the hardcore, now this is not the Republican Party. This is Trump voters. These are people who identify themselves as Trump voters. They're still Trump voters, by and large.
Gotcha. Can I ask one more quickie?
Sure.
I was going to ask Professor Wolf, if he's not there, where does he or where do you invest your money now?
I have my money in cash and in bond funds and a little tiny bit in a bet that the market's going to go south. I wouldn't recommend that anybody do what I've done. I have lost money doing what I've done. I did the exact opposite of the advice from the investment newsletter that actually is one of the sponsors of this show, the Aiden Forecast, and because they told me, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, jump into the market now, and should have done it, but I didn't. So here I am.
Yeah, well, I did what you did. I'm in these damn 1.5% FDIC insured funds, but
yeah,
okay.
But at least it's safe. At least it's safe. I mean,
it's safe.
Yeah. Howard, thank you, Tom. Yeah, thanks a lot for the call. I think when you're in your 60s, you make different investment decisions than you do when you're in your 30s. If I was in my 30s right now, whatever spare money I have would be entirely in stocks or real estate, but and I would be looking to buy on dips and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it would be a whole completely different thing if I was looking at a 10 or 20-year horizon rather than what's probably a 10-year horizon. John in Cumberland, Maryland. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm well. What's up?
Can you hear me okay?
Just fine. Can you hear me okay?
One of the things that's been occurring to me, is as we talk regularly about, like the Republicans and their sponsors wanting to roll back the New Deal. I'm really thinking that they're trying to roll us all the way back to, the beginning of the Enlightenment, the time of the Renaissance.
I think they want to go before that, actually. They want to go back to feudalism.
Values that they've got seem to be coming from.
Yeah, I think they want to go back before that. I think they want to go back to feudalism. This is a neo-feudalistic, a new feudalism movement.
The Renaissance was basically, like the break with feudalism.
That's
and
right.
The Enlightenment came out of those tenets of the Renaissance.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And although the Renaissance arguably was caused by the Black Plague, by the bubonic plague, the Black Death it was called. But
listen, Tom, I was listening to Free Speech TV last night on a show called Pirate TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard a speaker, Randy Mandel, speaking.
Yeah,
And he was talking about modern money theory. Now, I'm a pretty well-educated man, but I never had a real grasp on, how our economic system works. It just has seemed to be beyond me. I like to trace this back to some kind of roots. But this modern money theory is pretty interesting.
It is. It's very interesting. And John, I'm going to...
We've got a fiat money system since 1971 when the gold system went away. And it's kind of an open-ended system where the national debt is defined by the supply of all the money in circulation. Do you concur?
Not with what you just said, but I do concur broadly with modern money theory.
He said. Are you familiar with this guy, Mandel?
I'm not, and you're the second caller in 2 days who has called to ask about him. So either there's a campaign to promote his show on my show, or the guy said something really profound.
No. Listen, I'm not a troll, believe me.
Okay, I'm real familiar with modern monetary theory. We have had people, the modern monetary theorists on this program a number of times. We will again. Stephanie Kelton is, probably one of the best. She was on the show just about a few weeks ago, as I recall. So, yeah, we cover this stuff, John. John, thanks for the call. Karen in Farmington, Michigan. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind?
Hey, good afternoon, Tom. How are you?
I am well. I hope you are too, Karen. We just have a minute. So, quick one?
Hey, all right. I called because, I've been following this. I'm a sexual assault survivor. And I know there's a lot of trauma involved. There's a lot of stigma with going through that. It's difficult for women, but I've worked on crisis lines before, and men get sexually assaulted too.
Sure.
So I think we should take the sexism out of it, because usually a sexual assault, it doesn't have a lot to do about sex. It's more about power and control. So if we look at it like we're people, and the situation is that some more powerful people want to exert control over us, I think it would help the discussion instead of alienating men.
No, I understand what you're saying, Karen, and I don't broadly disagree with it. I think it's about both, frankly. Well, because powerful women tend not to do this, but I don't know. We'll have to see as our culture shakes up. But Karen, thank you for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Jane Mayer's new book, Dark Money, the history of the billionaires behind the rise of the radical right. And it's, by the way, just an extraordinary, astonishing book. This is from chapter 19, sort of the introductory chapter. And she's talking about one of the Koch summits where all these billionaires get together and plan strategy and throw money into the pot and that kind of thing. The highlight of the Koch summit in 2009 was, which, by the way, was the year President Obama's first year in office, was an uninhibited debate about what conservatives should do next in the face of their electoral defeat. As the donors and other guests dined in the hotel's banquet room like Roman senators attending a gladiator duel in the Forum, they watched a passionate argument unfold that encapsulated the stark choice ahead. Sitting on one side of the stage facing the participants was the Texas Senator John Cornyn, the head of the National Republican Senatorial Committee and former justice on the Texas Supreme Court. Poised on the other side of the moderator was the South Carolina Senator Jim DeMint, a conservative provocateur who defined the outermost anti-establishment fringe of the Republican Party and who, in the words of one admirer, was the leader of the Huns. 57 at the time, he was 5 months older than Cornyn, but his dark hair, lean build, and more casual aw-shucks style made him appear years younger. Before his election to Congress, DeMint had run an advertising agency in South Carolina. He understood how to sell, and what he was pitching that night was an approach to politics that, according to the historian Sean Willits, would have been recognizable to DeMint's forebearers in the Palmetto State as akin to the radical nullification of federal power advocated in the 1860s by the Confederate secessionist John C. Calhoun. The two Republican senators had been at loggerheads for some time. That night, they gave opposing opening statements. Cornyn spoke in favor of the Republican Party fighting its way back to victory by broadening its appeal to a wider swath of voters, including moderates. In contrast, DeMint portrayed compromise as surrender. He had little patience for the slow-moving process of constitutional government. He regarded many of his Senate colleagues as timid and self-serving. The federal government posed such a dire threat to the dynamism of the American economy, in his view, that anything less than all-out war on regulations and spending was a cop-out. DeMint was the face of a new kind of extremism, and he spoke that evening in favor of purifying rather than diluting the Republican Party. He argued that he would rather have 30 Republicans who believed in something than a majority who believed in nothing, a line that was a mantra for him and that brought cheers and applause from the gathered onlookers. Rather than compromising their principles and working with the new administration, the Obama administration, DeMint argued, Republicans needed to take a firm stand against Obama, waging a campaign of massive resistance and obstruction regardless of the 2008 election outcome. Then they go through a discussion about how they debated, the TARP, and DeMint had voted against it, Cornyn for it, and, some of the just issue things. Sitting silently at a table in the front row through all this were Charles Koch and his wife, Liz. No one came to Cornyn's defense. It was widely assumed that the Kochs, as hardcore free market enthusiasts, had opposed the huge government bailouts of the private sector. Later, many reporters assumed this too, ascribing the Kochs' opposition to Obama as stemming from a principled disagreement over issues such as the TARP bailouts. But none of this was true. Had people checked the records, they would have found it quite revealing. At first, the Kochs political organization, Americans for Prosperity, had in fact taken what appeared to be a principled libertarian position against the bank bailouts. But the organization quickly and quietly reversed sides when the bottom began to fall out of the stock market, threatening the Kochs' own vast investment portfolio. The market had begun to collapse on Monday, September 29, when, in the face of heavy opposition from conservatives, the House unexpectedly failed to pass a federal rescue plan. By the end of the day, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had fallen 777 points, losing 6.9% of its value. It was the stock market's largest one-day drop ever. Although some conservative groups and politicians such as DeMint still opposed the bailout, the market panic was enough to change many minds. And among those who flipped during the next 48 hours were the Kochs. But if the Kochs' personal interest in protecting their portfolio had trumped their free market principles, they weren't about to mention it in front of a group full of libertarians whose cash they wanted to combat Obama. Instead, the sentiment among the donors, as the first Koch seminar of the Obama era came to an end, was, as one witness put it, like a bunch of gorillas beating their chests. After hearing both sides out, the assembled guests chose the path of extremism. The Kochs had already concluded that they would need to resort to extraordinary political measures to achieve their goals. A few days before the January 2009 donor seminar, Charles and David Koch had privately weighed their options with their longtime political strategist in a meeting inside the black glass fortress that served as Koch Industries' corporate headquarters in Wichita, Kansas. Advisors to Obama later acknowledged he had no inkling of what he was up against. He had campaigned as a partisan politician who had idealistically taken issue with those who liked to slice and dice our country into red and blue states. His vision, like his own racial blend and geographic heredity, was one of reconciliation, not division. The sentiment was laudable, but alas, wishful thinking. The newly sworn-in president looked down at the ground directly beneath his polished shoes The book Dark Money by Jane May.
Podcast. ThomHartmann.com/podcast. They're commercial free, and you can listen anytime, any place you want.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Thank you. Welcome back. Okay, second man mysteriously bursts into flames in England. A man has died after he burst into flames on a street in Hull, England on Wednesday, 2 weeks after London police issued for something. There's a word missing in this sentence. 2 weeks after London police something for witnesses of another similar incident. Daniel Lingwood, a resident of Hull, looked out his window to see flames across the road, according to the local newspaper. He went out to help the victim, who was not named. Apparently, the victim was a guy who was like in his 70s. He was 70 years old, former construction worker. There was no accelerant found on his body. Nobody knows why he burst into flames. Or apparently nobody knows why the guy before him burst into flames. But two of them. Is this the last days? Or have we just finally found something that is more common than election fraud in the United States? More people die in the United States from televisions falling on their heads than commit election fraud. About 30 a year, right? So I don't know how many people spontaneously burst into flames in the United States, though. But 2 in the UK in 2 weeks, that's like an epidemic. Meanwhile, speaking of, say what? Maybe Roy Moore will, Sean says. Yeah. Oh, or maybe not. Roy Moore, by the way, they just certified the election in Alabama. Doug Jones is now the senator. So that's done. I said Georgia earlier, didn't I? I was mixing up my races. Yeah, that was Alabama. A new study coming that was just published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Just want to quickly share this with you. As the Trump administration is bragging about the fact that they have done away with literally hundreds of rules, we call them consumer protections, that reduce soot in the air from power plants and from vehicles. And they're doing waivers and they're changing rules and all this kind of stuff. As they are doing this, as they are actively making our air more poisonous, this story is in today's New York Times by Nicholas Bakalar. Air pollution contributes to more than 20,000 deaths per year in the United States. This was just published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. They looked at the period from 2000 to 2012. It's a 12-year period. And what they found was that there was an absolute, measurable, direct correlation between exposure to tiny particles of air pollution, like the stuff that comes out of diesel trucks or the stuff that comes out of coal-fired power plants, an absolute direct relationship between that and heart attacks and dying. And what they said is this amounts to more deaths per year in the United States than caused by AIDS. This is Dr. Joel Schwartz, professor of epidemiology at Harvard. And then he went on to say, but unlike AIDS, we know the cure. Scrubbers on coal-burning power plants that don't have them, and reduction in nitrogen dioxide emissions because they drive the production of ozone. So if we simply went to electric vehicles and did away with coal-fired power plants, literally 20,000 people a year would not die in the United States. 20,000 people a year, more than die of AIDS. We're very concerned about AIDS, but hey, if we did something about all that air pollution, we might make, some of the companies that are owned by some of the petro-billionaires who own the Republican Party a little less profitable. And you can't have that, right? Laura in Littleton, Colorado. Hey, Laura, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Back at you, Laura.
I'm calling because I just finished an amazing book. I think you've mentioned it on your show, but I just want to bring it up for listeners who may not be familiar. It's called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, and it's a series of essays written by psychiatrists and mental health professionals who have observed Trump over time and have some obviously extremely disturbing observations about his mental health. Right. And I was thinking about this because one of the points they made was that those who are mentally unstable are particularly vulnerable to stressful situations and criticism and negativity around them, and that these sorts of things actually exacerbate the instability. And my theory about Donald Trump and the amount of time that he spends on golf courses is that his handlers are trying to keep him as stable as they can. And one of the ways I think that he depressurizes is being on a golf course, is being out in Mar-a-Lago and doing his thing on the links.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I think there's more there that we probably won't know until after the Trump presidency is over. But I suspect that there's more there than just, you know, why is the White House covering up the fact that he's playing golf and refusing to acknowledge it? And, you know, and why is he playing so much golf? I mean, he's basically played golf to the exclusion of other things. I mean, you know, taking large chunks of his day for about 1 out of every 4 days since he's been president.
Right, exactly. And that's exactly the point. Is he's away from the television. He's away from, you know, hearing the pressure of the Oval Office. There was a picture that showed up on Facebook yesterday where evidently there's this huge white truck.
Right, to block the CNN cameras.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
And then Don Lemon, he made a funny, he said, well, I guess we're going to need higher cameras, right? Which is a joke on the old wall thing, you know.
Exactly. The implications of this, the fact that this man is this unstable, and I know I'm extrapolating. I just went like 5, steps down the road, but I just think that's absolutely terrifying. Yeah. But I think about the amount of time that George W. Bush spent in Crawford, and a lot of people thought that was they were literally kind of centering him and calming him down and getting him ready to go back, to Washington and do his presidential thing. And I just think what's happening with Trump is that on steroids. So yeah. I just wanted to share.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. Laura, thank you for the call. Susan in Brunswick, Georgia. Hey, Susan, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I've got to tell you, I'm really upset. I think that you should put that roll of toilet paper with Trump's face on it back on the screen, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I'm really burning up about it.
All right.
With what he is doing to the American people with these taxes, he's rubbing our face in it. And taking away our health care, making people die, and not to mention all the other horrible things that are being done to us Americans. That toilet paper should go back up behind you, and we should see it. It's really the only thing that gives me a little bit of a chuckle when I watch your show.
Well, Susan, thank you. I'm not going to do that, and here's why. There's an old saying that it's never wise to wrestle in the mud with a pig because, A, you get all muddy, and B, the pig enjoys it. And it seems to me that taking Trump on with regard to issues, which is what I've always done. I very rarely get into personality stuff and whatnot, but taking these guys on with issues is a reasonable thing. But when I'm putting, we did it as a promotion actually on the last day of the Free Speech TV fundraiser. I said, I found it on Amazon, and I said, hey, I'll buy a roll of this toilet paper and send it to, whoever, to a random person who donated on the last day of our fund drive. And by the way, we have that person. I'll put their name out, but we're going to send them a roll of toilet paper. And then I kind of got carried away with it. And I thought, oh, yeah, I'll put it on the set, too. But it's really, just because Trump's in the gutter doesn't mean that I should be.
I don't think that you're in the gutter or anything like that. I think when somebody earns our respect, then possibly. But this guy doesn't deserve our respect at all. Yeah. And especially with these taxes that I always say we're going to be a third world country. We're on our way there, and we're also on our way to becoming like North Korea as well with this guy in there and the Republican Party. I think it should be up there, but it's your show, and I respect you for that.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. Bye.
Yep, good talking with you. Alex in Edison, New Jersey. Hey, Alex, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I'm calling to just give some information out and to support something you said earlier. You or maybe the professor mentioned that you thought commodities and assets were overpriced.
Well, I was wondering. Dean Baker wrote this piece that's over in Alternate right now, suggesting that housing and the stock market are actually not overpriced right now. I think they are, but so anyhow, back to you, Alex.
Sure. If you look at the S&P, the PE ratio, the S&P 500.
Mm-hmm. That's the price to earnings ratio for people who don't know what we're talking about. It's the mathematical formula. It's the ratio, the divisor between how much the stock sells for and how much the stock pays out in dividends. Annually, as I recall?
Correct.
Yeah. So
one website that tracks it is, I'll just spell it out, www.multpl.com. multpl.com, like multiple without the
right.
E. And it shows the Shiller ratio as well as the regular ratio of the 500 largest traded companies. Without getting too mathematical here.
Mm-hmm.
So on average, going back to 1800, by inspection, it's about 16.
The PE ratio?
Yes.
Okay.
This is the Shiller. On Black Tuesday, it was 30.
Black Tuesday. Which Black Tuesday?
The first one.
In 29?
Anyway, yeah, I hear the music.
Yeah, okay.
Right now it's 33 and growing up, and at the dot going up, and at the .com bubble it was 45.
Ah. Well, thank you, Alex, for providing that context. That's fascinating. I'll have to check it out. Alex, thank you. You confirm my suspicions that we're getting into 1929 territory. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Barbara in Seattle. Hey, Barbara, what's on your mind today?
Well, I just want to say that being sexually harassed was the only good days of my life. I worked in the Democratic Party since the 50s because I was an Eleanor Roosevelt Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two things that people should read if they want to understand what's been going on. The ABCs of the American Money System by Representative Wright Patman. I think he's from West Virginia.
Yeah, years ago. Yeah.
And nobody, it's 4 pages. And the other thing is the Great Transportation Conspiracy, the only time it was printed in the media. You know what that is?
I don't.
Whitney, Harper's, February 1981.
And what was
we have here?
What was the conspiracy, Barbara?
What?
What was the conspiracy?
You'll just have to read it.
Okay.
The Great Transportation Conspiracy. It was during the Second World War. The president had to get the cooperation of the manufacturers. And parenthetically, you have to realize the Russian, Stalin, saved the machine tool industry of the United States because Stalin was the only one buying any machine tools during the 30s. But February 1981, Harper's, read that. But what I really wanted to get at was that you get what you subsidize. And
Sure.
People don't understand in this country that the real harassment of women in this world and children is that we're spending $1 billion, or actually $2 billion a day burning children and women alive. Every single tax dollar that goes to the federal government goes to bombs and weapons.
Well, not everyone, but about a quarter of them.
Yes, it does, because you got your $700 billion of taxes, and you've got your $600 billion of the cost of financing the national $20 billion worth of national debt. And they're making they combined the two trust funds, Social Security and Medicare, to pretend that was part of the budget, so they can so they can embezzle them in bombs.
But out of a $2+ trillion annual budget, 700, well, maybe it's a little less than 2 trillion because I thought it was about half the budget, but it's 700 billion, isn't that the amount that is going to the Pentagon this year?
Yeah, 700 billion. Plus, you have to add that all of the debt is from the unconstitutional wars. The interest on that debt is close to 600 billion, I think.
Yeah.
But you check it out.
So what's your
Somebody
solution
has
for this,
to
Barbara?
Get these figures straight.
What are you proposing we do about this?
We start understanding that all governments are capitalist. And the thing that, the only time government tells the truth, they have to tell the truth. You know the only time that any government in this country has to tell the truth?
Is when?
When they issue bond prospectus. All the people that collect the debt.
Oh yeah, debt is
have
absolutely
to be told the truth.
Yeah, debt is absolutely
and the public
sacrosanct.
That pays the debt. You can't even get a copy of the bond prospectus at any hearing at any government level.
Interesting, Barbara. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Mark in Prairie du Sac, Wisconsin. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I've been reading this book, The Confederate Nation. It was published in, I think, 1979, and it's got, a history of the Confederacy. And I think some of our politicians can kind of confuse the preamble to the Confederate Constitution with ours because they talk more about the sovereign states, make more of a reference to that. But in addition, there's a passage in there from one of their philosophers in the Confederacy, claiming that the Confederacy separated themselves as kind of a protest against the excesses of the American Revolution, which was promoting the false and unnecessary theories for the revolution that was promoting a solemn protest. It was a Reformation run mad, according to this George Fitzhugh, that a solemn protest against the doctrines of natural liberty, human equality, and the social contract as taught by Locke and the American sages of 1776, and an equally solemn protest against the doctrines of Adam Smith, Benjamin Franklin, Jean-Baptiste Say, Tom Paine, and the rest of the infidel political economists who maintain that the world is too much governed. And I kind of find parallels to that in what Republicans are promoting today, that it's more or less they feel the need to have a aristocracy.
Yes, the Republicans are promoting feudalism, feudalism, not futile.
And I agree completely there because it just seems like that in the Confederate preamble there's no mention of the general welfare.
Right.
And I mean that, and our Constitution was flawed in that it promoted slavery for another 100 years.
Well, it allowed it in theory until 1808, but it certainly lasted much longer than that. Yeah.
And it just disturbs me a lot that they claim that that even they bring up Adam Smith all the time, but Adam Smith said more than just profit and loss. I mean, he said a great deal more than that because there's a social contract between the employer and the employee.
Oh, and between the business and the community. I mean, he writes about this in his book Theory of Moral Sentiments.
And it's because I've read Agrarian Justice now, and I've got a copy
Which is
of
Thomas
The Rights
Paine.
of Man,
Yep.
Thomas Paine, and that it seems like these guys are rejecting the actual. They give plenty of lip service to the revolution and the founders and all that, but they continually reject the guiding principle behind that because there is a social contract. Unless we have that, maintain that social contract, we're going to fall apart.
Right. Well, and what's happening? Pardon me, I just inhaled something. But what's happening right now in the United States, excuse me, which is fascinating, is that our social contract is actually changing right in front of our eyes. Part of it has to do with the politics of outsiderness, all that. Part of it has to do with the restructuring of our economy, where we've gone from early Reaganomics to now radical Reaganomics. And part of it has to do with the relationship, this whole issue about men forcing themselves on women and you know, sexual assault and all that kind of stuff, the whole Me Too thing. And all of these, you know, are like cultural changes that are just kind of whipsawing us in a whole variety of ways. I'd say the latter, you know, the sexual one is a good thing. It's a kind of a waking up thing. But the Republicans, you know, what they're doing to us economically is just devastating. Mark, I have to move along, but thank you for the call. That's a fascinating thought. Nora in Minneapolis. Hey, Nora, thanks for listening to KTNF. What's up?
Hey, I actually watch you on YouTube now because it's so, you know, you can pause and then listen to things.
So what's on your mind today?
You get to see it visually.
But you can't
on YouTube.
Yeah, but you can't get it in the car.
I was calling about this poll survey that was done and created a poll here in Minnesota about the Al Franken situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a Democratic firm public policy polling, PPP, I'll call them. And so they called less than 1,000 voters, 671 Minnesota voters in just over the last 2 days. And 60% said they thought the Senate Ethics Committee should have completed its investigation before any decision was made, while 35% believe he should resign immediately.
And was this all voters or just Democrats?
They're calling voters, Minnesota voters.
So that 35% was probably all Republicans.
Yeah, I believe that's
Because that's about the percentage of registered voters, registered Republicans in Minneapolis, isn't it? It's like the high 20s, low 30s.
Oh, they don't have a will to live here. I tell you what, when I ran for mayor for the Grassroots Party in '93, I got more votes than the Republican candidate.
Wow, that's great.
So, but not more than the 6 Democrats, right?
Yeah.
Owned and operated by the Democratic Party. But anyway, the other part of it was half of voters said he should not resign, and 42% said he should go through with it. Okay, overall, whatever that was. And despite the allegations, it shows that he remains popular in his home state at 53% approval compared to 42% disapproval. And according to PPP, most senators do not score above halfway mark, and he's 53% in popularity in their home state.
Al Franken is an insanely popular politician, has been for quite some time. I mean, he won his first election by a squeaker, but his second one was overwhelming. And the loss of Al Franken was like the point guy on net neutrality in the Senate. I mean, he was a pit bull on net neutrality, among other things, and also the Trump administration supporting banksters ripping us off. And so it seems like he would have been real high on the list that friends of Sean Hannity, like Ms. Tweeden, would want to take down, in my opinion.
I'm just wondering if this was his excuse to get out of such a high, stressful type of life. You know? I mean, maybe he's put in 10 years and that was enough now that he's...
No, I guarantee you that's not the case, Nora. I'm not in Al's confidences, but I do know him well enough to absolutely believe, we used to work together at Air America. Thank you, Nora, by the way, for the call. To believe that he is not happy that this is happening, and he's not, making the best of a bad situation. Well, hopefully he is making the best of a bad situation, but that was not something that he ever wanted to have happen. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. It's been a fascinating day. We'll be back tomorrow. Last day of the year, right? Tomorrow's the last day of the year, arguably. Yeah, for us anyway. So in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeats.com.